Chapter 1035. Madame Gao waited quietly for Chunong to finish speaking before she raised her head and straightened her body. Although Han Hui's 5 fingers had extended their lives with the help of the black space, it did not stop them from aging. Madame Gao's body originally had the shriveled characteristic of the elderly. However, at this moment, when she stretched her body, one could almost hear the crackling of her bones. Madame Gao's height increased by almost 10 centimeters. She revealed a sly smile and said, "Thank you for helping me by so much time." Madame Gao retreated to Harold's withered corpse and slowly pulled out the katana, tyrannical, from his chest. This time, Han Hui had recast tyrannical in Japan. For some reason, they had chosen the shape of a katana. From the length of the katana, it should be a katana or a katana. The katana was too long, and the ribs were too short. The dull metallic rust had faded from the blade, and it now had a metallic silver texture. There were traces of blood on the blade, and from the side, one could see a human face. Madame Gao pulled out tyrannical and sheathed it at her waist. She pointed the blade upwards and inserted it into her belt. Because there was no sheath, the blade was exposed like a silver mirror, and it carried a chill. She pressed her hand on the hilt of the katana, but everyone's eyes were fixed on the blade of tyrannical. Alessandra's face grew older. She said in disbelief, "Impossible. This is impossible. How could tyrannical be recast?" "The blood sacrifice is a success," Madame Gao said with a smile. "I have been waiting for this moment. Fortunately, you gave me enough time to complete the last step of the blood sacrifice." Chunong stared at Harold's withered corpse and suddenly laughed. "We overlooked the abnormality of Harold's corpse. Originally, everyone thought that this was a normal situation caused by the erosion of the drought demon's vital energy. However, we overlooked that the withered corpse might not necessarily be due to water evaporation. It could also be due to the blood being sucked dry. Harold was the last sacrifice. You used his blood to complete the blood sacrifice." Alessandra ignored her severe injuries and shouted, "Impossible. Tyrannical's blood sacrifice must have 5 rebellious elements. Daniel and Harold are not related at all. Moreover, although Harold killed Ward and completed more than half of the blood sacrifice, there is still at least 100 people's blood needed to be smeared on the blade in a way that meets the requirements of the Wayless sacrificial ritual. Unless Harold isn't completely unrelated to Daniel," Chunong said slowly. He turned to look at the bewildered Danny and suddenly laughed. He turned back to Madame Gao and said, "Harold is Daniel's biological father, right?" Danny's entire body trembled as if he had been struck by lightning. He abruptly raised his head to look at Madame Gao and mumbled, "It can't be, it can't be." But Madame Gao did something that terrified him. She tucked her hair back and nodded. "Yes, it wasn't easy for me to find this out. Harold was secretly in love with Heather. Because of jealousy, he wanted to kill Rand. They were originally good friends, so he found me and obtained a bottle of poison from me. This kind of poison can weaken a person's body. He invited Rand to climb the mountain with him. Originally, he planned to let Rand die from lack of oxygen while climbing the snowy mountain. Otherwise, it would be impossible for your father to fall off the cliff." Madame Gao turned to Daniel and said, "He practiced internal energy in Kunlun Mountains and already had 60 years' worth of internal energy. How could he have died because he slipped and fell off the cliff? It was my poison that caused his internal energy to scatter and his body to weaken." Danny's body stiffened. He clenched his fists and wanted to throw a punch, but as soon as he stood up, he felt that all his true chi had been sucked dry. He couldn't muster up any strength in his body and fell to the ground powerlessly. Madame Gao smiled and said, "It was this kind of poison. Now do you understand your father's feelings?" Halfway through, he sensed that something was wrong, but it was too late. Harold's original plan was very good, and your father, Rand, did not dare to expose him because he was afraid that Harold would make a move on you, who knew about it. So he painstakingly pretended to slip and let himself fall off the cliff. His calculations were very good. He knew that Harold had a crush on Heather. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't act against you and your mother because he wanted to be your stepfather. And with his experience, Rand could have fallen off the cliff without suffering any fatal injuries. This was Kunlun Mountains, so he could send a message to the people of Kunlun Mountains to save him and then go back to find Harold for revenge. What a good story of a prince's revenge. Madame Gao vividly recounted the story that she didn't see with her own eyes. It was as if she was at the side and listening to Rand's thoughts. But he miscalculated. Madame Gao pressed on the hilt of tyrannical and slowly pulled out the demonic blade. She raised the blade to the sky, and the blade reflected a snow-like brilliance. When he pretended to slip, an accident disrupted his plan. Ah! Daniel roared in a heart-wrenching manner. His son pounced forward, wanting to pull his father back. The father and son struggled on the cliff. Rand had no choice but to pull his hand back and help his son up. However, at this moment, Harold was tormented by the jealousy in his heart. For some strange reason, he pushed Rand. That was truly a foolish action. He exposed his jealousy in front of everyone. Heather crazily went to hit him, and Harold directly pushed her off the cliff. What a cruel man. Rand fell off the cliff to protect his wife and son. At this time, he was still able to protect the two of you and didn't suffer any serious injuries. But he himself was seriously injured. With the cold of the snowy mountain, how could two women and children survive the night in the majestic Kunlun Mountains? So Rand sent out a secret signal and called for the people of Kunlun Mountains. He then transferred 60 years' worth of internal energy into your body to protect you from the cold and frostbite your internal organs. Your mother is an adult, so it shouldn't have been difficult for her to hold on until the people of Kunlun Mountain arrived. But another accident happened. You met a pack of wolves. Don't say any more, Daniel roared. But Harold actually had an affair with Heather. What he didn't know was that you were actually his son. Madame Gao suddenly revealed a big piece of information. Daniel's eyes were already bloodshot. He forcibly resisted the poison and stood up, his veins bulging. You, shut up. I won't allow you to insult her. Daniel's wounds had already healed, but they had already ruptured because of his unusual agitation. The serious saber that was stuck in Harold's chest trembled slightly. Danny's blood floated in midair, like pearls, and was carried by an invisible necklace towards the serious saber. It was then absorbed by this divine weapon. Chun Ong and the others awkwardly watched the love and hatred, as well as the ethical entanglement that had lasted for decades. Madame Gao was still provoking Lanner. Don't deceive yourself. Only if you and Harold are related by blood can you use Dowless to kill him. Only then will you fulfill the conditions of the blood sacrifice and let Dowless succeed in the first step of recasting. He's not my father. Danny was on the verge of collapsing, but he still insisted. My father will always be the man who protects us and loves us. My mother only loves him. Even if I have a relationship with that scum, it will never change that. I will never regret killing him. As Daniel struggled to support his body, he slowly straightened his spine. The serious blade trembled more and more violently. It let out an excited cry, and the serious true energy, alternating between red and black, soared into the sky. It circled in the air, turned into a galloping Sirius, and entered Danny's body. The powerful, true energy instantly collapsed. Danny raised his head and roared angrily. His muscles immediately tightened, and the powerful, true energy tore apart the clothes wrapped around him, leaving behind only a pair of tattered pants. The wounds on his body quickly contracted, and scars covered his entire body. Madame Gao slowly put Dowless down. Chun Ong whispered to the side. Daniel finally comprehended the path of a divine weapon. The Sirius blade has a cursed power. The more the heart hurts, the faster the blade. The power of the green cloud cover. Green is also green. Wizard Strange frowned, as if he could not bear to watch any longer. A golden magic array appeared in the void before him. However, Chun Ong stopped him and said, "This is the battle between the Heavenly Wolf Blade Master and the Dowless Weapon Grandmaster. It's the destined showdown between the Divine Weapon and the Devil Blade. If anyone else interferes, they will only be repelled by the Divine Weapon and the Devil Blade." Trust me, you don't want to suffer a joint attack from them. If I help him, will he still hit me? Strange said angrily. Chenong looked at the determined Danny and said slowly, revenge is a fine wine that can be drunk to one's heart's content. It can't be given to anyone else. Now, he'll kill anyone who dares to interrupt his revenge. But that old woman is clearly taking advantage of this. Strange said, even a ghost wouldn't believe that she doesn't have a scheme. Tyrannical, who has been completely reforged, is clearly superior to the broken Sirius blade. Daniel, who is exhausted and riddled with wounds, is definitely not a match for Madame Gao in her perfect condition. If Madame Gao wins, she can use Dallas to control Daniel and turn the Sirius Blade Master into her puppet. Why didn't you stop her if you knew? Strange said angrily. Chenong was exceptionally calm. He even revealed a mysterious smile. That's normal reasoning, but martial arts and divine weapons can't be so easily calculated. Madame Gao only wields divine weapons as if they were hammers and dung forks. Although Daniel's body is exhausted and broken, his soul is filled with grief and pain, just like Temujin in the past. He has touched upon the power of divine weapons on a deeper level. Victory and defeat are far from clear. Chenong glanced at the dying Alessandra. This Madame Gao has the meticulousness and prudence of a woman, but also the boldness and determination of a man. She used Harold to divert attention and get rid of Alessandra. Then, she used Danny to get rid of Harold, reforged the demonic blade, and used it to become the master of Dallas. Finally, she made a move herself and made Daniel her puppet. Chapter 1036. Madame Gao's greatest regret came from her lack of familiarity with Lawless Magic Blade. Whether it was to find someone to replace her as the leader of the society, or to endure under the circumstances, Madame Gao gave up on the fight for control of Lawless and handed it over to Alexandra. As a result, she did not have the opportunity to familiarize herself with Lawless's power. Alexandra was like a lioness, wary of anyone who tried to steal her power. Her control over Lawless, which in turn affected Black Sky, was the key to her control over the other four fingers. She would not allow anyone else to touch her. Since Madame Gao chose to endure, she naturally lost the opportunity to familiarize herself with Lawless. Only when Alexandra let go of Lawless and let her complete the mission did she secretly confirm that the Might of the Righteous Alliance spell scroll she obtained during the Republic of China era could affect Lawless to a certain extent. She did not have the opportunity to dig deeper into Lawless's power. It could be said that even though she had recast Lawless and obtained the initial recognition of Lawless as a weapon master, however, her understanding of the power of the magic blade in her hand was not as good as that green-haired kid who relied on his endless grief and anger to summon the divine weapon in his hand. Madame Gao calmed herself down and used her aura to infuse the demonic blade in her hand. As she exchanged auras, the Jinshi in the demonic blade sprouted like a seed, growing and comprehending the demonic blade's terrifying power. She stalled for time so that she could familiarize herself with the magic blade in her hand. Fortunately, Chenong was very cooperative and kept exposing her various schemes. Madame Gao secretly sneered. The contents of a plan that has already been completed are meaningless. No matter how much I say, these are all things that happened in the past. What use are they to the present? That was why she cooperated with him and told him about how she had used Harold to probe Rand after she discovered that he possessed the inheritance from Kunlun. In the end, she plotted against him. This secret even gave her a huge advantage when she plotted against Alexandra today. It was also the foundation of her plan to take over Lawless. This plot was formed from her hundreds of years of studying Alexandra's personality and behavior. It was rooted in the secrets that she learned when she plotted against Rand and formed the recast plan for Lawless. In the end, she found the last piece of the puzzle in China, Daniel. As for Daniel's identity as the owner of a divine armament, it was an unexpected surprise. Madame Gao knew very well that as a schemer, it was pointless to haggle over every ounce of intricate planning. The reason why a conspiracy was because the power of the person executing it was small and weak. It was difficult for them to influence the bigger picture, and there was no need to control every single condition of the execution of the conspiracy. Trying to control every single detail of the plan in their hands, as some schemers did, was unbelievably foolish in her eyes. With such power, why didn't he use overt schemes to suppress others? The true charm of conspiracies lay in the deep excavation of every bit of one's power, extending one's tentacles into every corner, constantly grasping secret information, and then using the power of the situation to make use of the constant changes of the situation. With the advantage of information, through continuous planning, one could obtain the relative information advantage of a specific time and place, covering the information that the opponent grasped, controlling and influencing the opponent, and finally, at the critical moment, using one's own information advantage to complete a fatal blow. Just like this time, Madame Gao didn't have any advantage in terms of power. No matter if it was Harold who controlled the evil god Spawn, or Alexandra who controlled Tyrannical, she wasn't a match for either of them. Daniel wasn't under her control either. In the beginning, Madame Gao didn't have any advantage, but she made full use of the information that she grasped: Daniel's background, Harold's fear, the evil god's prophecy, Tyrannical's secret. In the end, the one who took advantage of the situation and became the final victor of this series of changes. This was the essence of conspiracies. Conspiracies were a type of information warfare. To execute a conspiracy, one had to have the vision and determination of a strategist, grasp the wisdom of the game, and ignore the momentary gains and losses of a city or a place. Furthermore, one had to be good at grasping opportunities and also learn to give up. A conspiracy that hadn't been activated would never fail. The only time a conspiracy would truly have a flaw was when it was approached by someone. Thus, if a plan had to be completed, then the conspiracy would already have failed halfway. This was because a conspiracy that couldn't withstand any variables was a conspiracy that was close to failure. A conspiracy is at its most powerful when it can be activated, but it can also be inactivated. This was the wisdom that Madame Gao had painstakingly comprehended: Schrodinger's conspiracy. In this scheme, Harold's conspiracy was the most clumsy. This was because his plan couldn't withstand any variables, and it couldn't withstand failure. The moment he summoned the evil god Spawn, he had forced himself into a dead end. If he couldn't obtain Tyrannical, he would definitely lose. He was extremely foolish. As for Alexandra, she was secretly forced into a dilemma by Madame Gao. Harold's conspiracy became Alexandra's, and Alexandra couldn't bear the loss of Tyrannical. Her dispute with Harold was secretly pushed by Madame Gao into a zero-sum game. Alexandra didn't have any conspiracy to speak of. She was a complete sacrifice in Harold and Madame Gao's scheme. The key reason why she lost was because she was passive. Alexandra didn't have the initiative. She couldn't afford to lose. Madame Gao was the only one who hid herself well from the start. She was prepared to succeed and fail without any worries. She planned to scheme against the two of them. She could withstand any variables. In reality, S involvement, Chun Eng's summoning of Byakuya, and Daniel's seed burst were all variables outside of the conspiracy. However, these had affected Harold and Alexandra, but not Madame Gao at all. There was only one key point to her conspiracy. She wanted to send Tyrannical into the hands of either Harold or Daniel to deal the fatal blow. Whether Daniel killed Harold or Harold killed Daniel, the blood sacrifice would be completed. She didn't even trust the evil god's prophecy. Only if she failed at this crucial point would her conspiracy fail. Therefore, the only reason why Madame Gao's conspiracy failed was that Harold and Daniel had reconciled, and Daniel had forgiven Harold. Therefore, she interfered first and added fuel to the fire, causing Daniel to make up his mind to kill Harold. This was why she schemed against Daniel and made him fight to the death with Harold. This was not difficult. The information that Madame Gao had was enough to make the two of them fall out 10,000 times. She still hadn't provided the big information. Between the two of them, it was either one of them who died or the other lived. The second key point was to send Tyrannical into the final battle between the two of them. This required Madame Gao to personally make a move. This was also the moment when the conspiracy was at its weakest. Madame Gao relied on her hundreds of years of careful observation and her understanding of Alexandra. She was a poisonous snake that had been observing for hundreds of years. When she made her move, there was no reason for her to fail. Compared to Harold, who had countless flaws, crucial points, and personally made countless moves, Madame Gao only needed to complete these two things to win. Interlocking conspiracies were only the complacency of fools. A truly wise person would always push the boat with the current, and the moment they made their move, they had to ensure victory. This layer upon layer of gambling required constantly finding and grasping opportunities, creating opportunities, analyzing variables, and using variables to continuously integrate the changes in the outside world into the conspiracy. Then, with the smallest additional movements, the plan would be completed. Conspiracies also followed the principle of Occam's razor. Unless absolutely necessary, do not add any additional steps. The more movements, the more traces and flaws there would be. A true perfect crime was not an intricate plan. Instead, it was a precise attack that grasped the right opportunity, leaving no traces. But why did Madame Gao want to control Daniel? This completely violated any of the taboos in her rules of conspiracies. She could not handle variables and countless flaws. Furthermore, personally making a move was not going with the flow at all, because this was not a conspiracy. Madame Gao did not want to control Daniel. She was just giving it a try. This was a decision, not a plan. When she obtained tyrannical, she discovered that this was no longer a choice that she could not afford to make. Daniel could not possibly kill her. Madame Gao felt tyrannical in her hands fuse with her own true energy. She felt her thoughts break through the shackles of common sense. Apart from reason and instinct, all forgotten memories, perceptions, and repressed experiences, as well as dreams and fantasies that transcended human perception, were constantly being understood. This was a world outside of the human world of knowledge. It was the world of all the new and old gods. She understood ghosts and gods silently. The demonic beast Black Space was already completely under her control. This shapeless beast was no longer an incomprehensible existence to her. Instead, it was like an ordinary beast, and she easily tied the reins to it. Her way of existence had changed. She was no longer a physical body, but a kind of abnormality. Even if her physical body died, she would still be able to gather information about her. The rumors that were passed down by her subordinates, the memories of those who had seen and heard of her, and the stories that belonged to her for hundreds of years. These information would be reborn from these memes and become part of her genes. It could be said that she was a mimetic creature. She could manipulate information and influence people's minds. She could infiltrate people's hearts and use consciousness to change the physical world that life perceives. She was a ghost, and she could exist in the human brain. Furthermore, she was a god. This was the insignificant power of tyrannical. The moment she was acknowledged by tyrannical, Madame Gao had an epiphany. She finally understood the vastness of the universe and the limitlessness of time and space. What did humans count for? Daniel, Alexandra, Harold, Luke Cage. What did Chanong count for? They were just ants' dust. She finally detached herself from this game of chess and jumped out of the computer. A mere Daniel could not become the master of the god armament. He was just a chess piece. There was no need for any schemes against the chess piece. This choice was just a game of chess. So what if she succeeded? So what if she lost? When she knew that she could not control the serious blade and tyrannical at the same time, Daniel became meaningless to her. Chapter 1037. Madame Gao held tyrannical in her hand. The katana's blade faced the sky and slowly slashed down, aiming directly at Daniel. A formless sharp aura suddenly closed in without a sound, forcing Daniel to instinctively turn his head to the left, avoiding the sharp aura with his eyes. Tyrannical was not a magic blade, but even so, it was difficult for Daniel to look directly at its sharpness. In the sky, the me-goes that had already gained the upper hand began to move. These hideous and strange alien creatures were covered in a green, fungal carpet. The fungal carpet squirmed as if it had a life of its own, secreting mucus to nourish the biological armor beneath it. The compound eyes of these alien creatures turned, and the fungal carpet formed by countless tiny tentacles on the biological armor suddenly took root. The tentacle-like roots easily broke through the defense of the biological armor. The tiny black roots were like long hair, densely intertwining and spreading downwards. The bodies of these mutants trembled violently, as if they were in great pain. Those black hair-like things grew out of their compound eyes and spread under their bodies. In the sky, one after another, the me-gogs fell from the sky like dumplings, smashing to the ground with loud bangs. However, when the bodies of these alien creatures hit the ground, they only made a dull thud like leather. They were like lifeless leather bags, obviously no longer made of flesh and blood. The roots and tentacles of the mycelium grew densely and quickly covered the surface of the alien's body. Like the silk of a fungus, a pile of green hair formed a cocoon. Inside the cocoon, Migo seemed to be undergoing a terrifying metamorphosis. From time to time, the fungus that had eroded the cocoon could be seen writhing violently under the cocoon. Although Daniel was momentarily stunned, he quickly calmed down. Wizard Strange and Chunong were calmly watching from the side. Seeing such a change in the monsters in midair, Strange was the first to lose his patience. He carefully observed the condition of Migo, who was being corroded by the fungus, and glanced at Chunong. "You're the one who suggested not to interfere. Now that the situation has changed, did you expect it?" Chunang's expression did not look good, but he still put on an indifferent expression and said, "The core strength of Wu Dao has always been unknown. His ability to control ghosts and gods is a secret of Taoism that is not passed down. However, based on the abilities of the previous weapon masters, it is not difficult to see that tyrannical does not control the power of ghosts and gods, but the human heart. Migos belong to an alien fungal creature. The consciousness of these low-level warrior races is too simple, and the neural fungus that makes up their consciousness is easily controlled by the outside world. Now that Harold is dead and Migos is out of control, it has become the easiest power to control here. Madame Gao will definitely not let them go." Madame Gao used the unknown fungal carpet on the ground to first infect and control the collective consciousness of the fungal carpet. Using the collective consciousness of the fungal carpet as a springboard, she infected the Migos. I just don't know what she did to these alien mutants with her tyrannical power. No matter what it was, Strange said, "Madame Gao, who controls the magic blade, is too dangerous. We must get rid of her. Otherwise, who knows what kind of disaster a magic blade master will cause in New York." Chunong gave him a sidelong glance. "If you can do it, then do it. I'm happy to see you take care of her. Of course, it's not too bad if she takes care of you." Strange's expression was ugly, but he did not dare to say that he would easily take care of Madame Gao. From the changes that had happened to the Migos, he saw an unpredictable danger. Luke looked at the two people who were not friendly to each other and felt a little helpless. He did not know why the two of them could not see eye to eye with each other. With a clang, although Daniel was holding a weapon that looked like a half-melted iron rod, half of the rod was full of dents and even a little twisted. It was hard to imagine that this was one of the 10 divine weapons of Middle-earth, the celestial wolf blade that had once dominated and conquered the world. Although the blade was broken beyond recognition, it could still produce a resounding blade cry. Daniel's true energy gradually became restless. True energy and the divine weapon resonated with each other, like a giant electromagnet absorbing molten iron. The scorching true energy absorbed the divine weapon, gradually changing its atomic structure, bringing with it a faint magnetic force, and then rapidly strengthening. He raised the iron rod. There was no sharp blade, but it was wrapped in incomparably vicious true energy. It swept like the wind, burned like fire, and corroded like water. It was poisonous true energy that could corrode everything. Madame Gao looked at Danny, her eyes filled with the shrewdness of an old person. An invisible beast pounced over. This beast existed between illusion and reality. It was black sky, the supreme weapon and deity that Hahuei worshipped. However, in Madame Gao's hands, it was nothing more than a dog. But there was no doubt that it was a vicious dog. It was invisible everywhere, and even had the ability to turn illusory into reality for a short period of time. It gnawed on a person's flesh and blood, as if the flesh and blood of a person had disappeared into thin air. It was so strong that it could carry hundreds of tons of weight on its back. Black Sky pounced at Daniel, but at this time, Daniel was not completely unaware of Black Sky. The celestial wolf blade in his hand was like a magnet, guiding him in the direction of Black Sky's attack. Black Sky was like a giant piece of iron, causing the celestial wolf blade in his hand to be guided by an invisible force. Following the direction of the pole, the blade in Daniel's hand expanded outward like an explosion. The violent, true energy of the celestial wolf blade was like a wave. It forcefully corroded the void. The countless true energy on Black Sky's body greedily devoured everything like maggots. It was like a sandstorm that wore away Black Sky's body, and like water that corroded Black Sky's life force. In the end, it was like a deadly poison that corroded Black Sky's existence. Madame Gao could see that Black Sky was like acid had been poured on its head. It kept melting, and its body turned into pus and blood that dripped onto the ground. Just one drop was continuously corroding the ground, quickly corroding an area of several square meters. Madame Gao's expression was relaxed and indifferent. She only snorted coldly. Trash. Black Sky whimpered like a kitten, revealing a terrified expression. It hid behind Madame Gao, making people want to press it down and yell at it. Can't you have some dignity as a demonic beast? Madame Gao kicked it, causing it to stagger. Like an injured little beast, it wailed and hid. Chapter 1038. True energy rushed out of the Sirius blade in Daniel's hand, condensing into the phantom of a galloping Sirius. It struggled behind Daniel, almost breaking out of his body to devour him. As the phantom of the Sirius howled at the moon, a ferocious aura emanated from it. The ferocious face of the Sirius kiss was filled with malice. The tentacles that popped out of the cocoon paused, the tiny tentacles all over the tentacles keenly sensing the strong malice. The monster in the cocoon seemed to be thinking about the difference between itself and the vicious beast outside. Then, it carefully retracted its tentacles and put on the broken cocoon. It seemed to feel that something was wrong, so it carefully wriggled in the cocoon and carefully sealed the hole in the cocoon to cover it up. All of this happened under everyone's eyes. Luke Cage and Strange had strange expressions. Daniel snorted coldly and turned his attention back to Madame Gao. As for Chenong, he almost laughed out loud. Inferior Migu was a battle consumable, commonly known as cannon fodder. In the Yugus fungus family, it was a consumable with low intelligence and suppressed life instincts. It could not be considered a complete intelligent life. Although they had all the characteristics of life, in reality, they were a type of biological weapon developed by Migu. Madame Gao had used Tyrannical's power to corrode and change their essence, giving them life and spirituality. However, in the field of biological weapons modification, Madame Gao was a complete novice. She had borrowed Tyrannical's power to modify them imperfectly. She had only crudely controlled Tyrannical, complementing the life instincts of these monsters to make up for it. Madame Gao had thought that by letting nature take its course, she would be able to obtain a stronger species. However, she had forgotten that survival was the greatest instinct of life. Fear was the intrinsic nature of genes and even memes. It was not necessary for a living being to be aggressive. It was not necessary for a living being to be fearful in combat. What was truly important was to learn to be afraid. The creatures in the cocoon had learned this perfectly. From a perspective of the evolution of life, this was great. These artificially created lives overcame the influence of the alien Migo on their genes, overcame the gene expression that was not afraid of death, and evolved the instincts of fear and camouflage. They even learned the skills to play dead in front of powerful challengers and avoid battles. It could be said that they had become a new species that could survive and reproduce for a long time. But Madame Gao might not like this sort of evolution. Strange came back to his senses. He looked at the alien xenogeneics in the cocoon and said, "This looks like a good thing, but we can't leave these new life forms on Earth. We have to send them back to where they belong." He turned to Chenong and said, "The power of that demonic blade doesn't seem to be that terrifying. Life is hard to be bound." Chenong sighed with emotion. Many people want to control life and create species for war. They want to use the great power of life to kill and conquer, but they have forgotten. Life is hard to be restrained and controlled. The history of humans using animals as weapons and participating in wars is almost as long as the history of war itself. But those lives, they did not succumb to war. They were still thriving. They still retained their nature. Why do the flames of war burn? Why do the autumn leaves fall? Nature cannot be taken away. Even if they are born in a laboratory, even if their instincts are suppressed and controlled, there will be a day when they will break free and shine with the brilliance of life itself. Chenong smiled and said, "Therefore, for Tyrannical, who creates controllable memes, the real difficulty lies in controlling the most primitive impulses of life and suppressing their survival instincts. Only a truly powerful weapon grandmaster can use Tyrannical to create and enslave high-level meme life forms, gods. Otherwise, it will be like Alexandra. Even if she can control Tyrannical for a while, once she loses Tyrannical, she will turn the tables on herself and be harmed by the demons. Because the free will of life will not be enslaved forever." Strange said solemnly, "This kind of terrifying power that can create and enslave demons and gods. The easier it is to obtain it, the more careful one must be in controlling it." Chenong nodded. Madame Gao still doesn't know how to control this power. She also doesn't know how to use this power. She still doesn't understand why the demons and gods created by Zhang Daoling could be used by the Taoists after losing Tyrannical for thousands of years. Why did Alexandra suddenly lose Tyrannical and immediately suffer the backlash of black space? So much so that her hands and body were gradually controlled by a demonic beast they created. What Chenong didn't say was that Madame Gao still didn't understand that demons and gods did not refer to an existence. Gods referred to the complete meme life forms created from human spiritual activities. They were difficult to control, and enslaving them was not easy. Zhang Daoling still needed to sign an alliance with them to worship the gods and serve them. This was so that the gods of Shu County could still obey the alliance after 1,000 years and establish the power of Taoist talismans. Madame Gao was just a newly promoted weapon grandmaster, and she wanted to enslave them like dogs? Wasn't this thinking of things too simply? In Madame Gao's hands, Tyrannical could at most tame an incomplete demonic beast like black space, or steal the power and dependence of the old gods. If she wanted to enslave the old gods and control the old rulers, she still needed to work hard to level up. The power that Madame Gao could truly command and control now was only ghosts. Ghosts were incomplete meme life forms, or rather, low-level meme life forms. They were like viruses and single-celled organisms in meme life forms. Memes were relatively fragmented and simple. They were made up of fragments of human spiritual activities, simple emotions, and memories. Because fear was a relatively pure emotion and spiritual activity, it was the easiest to be born from fear, and that was ghosts. However, simplicity did not mean that it was not dangerous. Viruses were also the simplest material life forms, but they were the most dangerous of all material life forms. No one was worried that a beast could destroy human civilization, but humans were afraid of this simplest life form, viruses. They were afraid that they would destroy humanity. Viruses and memes were infectious, self-replicating, and had a simple way of existence. They were ghosts that were extremely difficult to destroy. Such existences were even more terrifying than gods, and even gods feared them. They were terrifying existences that could only be controlled by Tyrannical and the strongest weapon grandmaster. If gods were said to be omnipotent creative forces controlled by tyrannical, then ghosts were hidden ultimate weapons that could destroy everything. Madame Gao seemed to understand the crux of the matter. She was not angry. Facing the blade of Daniel's blade, she slowly retreated and said, "Daniel, these things that you control don't seem to be of much use." Daniel said in a chilling tone. He raised the serious saber and walked toward Madame Gao with a cold smile. "I'm still not familiar with its power." Madame Gao caressed the blade of tyrannical and smiled. "But I will never fail, because I have seen through your fear and your weakest side. There will always be a shadow in your heart. If you don't fix the hole in your heart, you will never be able to defeat me." Daniel roared angrily. "I don't think there's anything that can stop me from taking revenge." He had just finished speaking when he found himself sinking into darkness. His surroundings grew colder and colder. The cold wind whistled past. Daniel sneered. "You want to control me with a mere illusion? You underestimate me." He raised the serious saber and borrowed the power of the divine weapon to tear the illusion apart. At this time, Madame Gao's voice came from behind him. "Is that so?" Daniel turned his head and saw a canine standing in front of him. It had a long face, a protruding nose, and pointed ears. It was a wolf. This cunning animal had a smile on its face. Its eyes were cruel and cunning. This animal was ferocious to ordinary people, but not worth mentioning to the strong. But it caused Daniel's soul to leave his body. He trembled slightly. It was as if he had returned to his weakest childhood. He gradually could not lift the serious saber. In the eyes of the beast, his body had shrunk back to when he was only a few years old. His young body shivered in the cold wind. The wolf laughed like Madame Gao. "What really frightens people is often fear itself." A woman's voice came from behind Daniel. Daniel's body trembled. His powerful Jinshi had disappeared. He could not even hold the saber in his hand tightly. The wolf pounced behind Daniel, but he did not dare to turn around. He knelt on the ground, trembling. "This is the power of a ghost." Chenong sighed. "It is not that the ghost itself is powerful. It is that when humans face ghosts, they become very weak." He encountered the wolf when he was afraid of being a child. The wolf ate his mother. Even though he is so powerful now, when faced with this scene when he was a child, he could not help but become weak. Strange looked at the terrified Daniel and sighed. Chenong did not agree with him. He is not afraid of the wolf. He is afraid of this memory. He is afraid of what he did not see. He is afraid of the unknown in his memory. So he does not dare to turn around. In front of the ghost, he is just a child. Ghosts are not powerful. It is when faced with them that humans become weak. What truly frightens people is often fear itself. Unless he turns around and faces everything, he will never have the power to kill the wolf. He will always be a child. When faced with a ghost, the only strength he can rely on is the endless courage in his heart. Chenong slowly turned around and walked into the darkness. "Go back. He is already lost." Strange's figure also gradually faded. He sighed. "Be that as it may. It is too cruel for a person with such a shadow in his childhood to face the day he lost his mother, to face that memory, to face what will happen after he escapes. Not everyone has that kind of courage." Chen Eng's voice came from the darkness. "But war is cruel. The confrontation between the Lord of Divine Weapons and Demon Blades is not a battle, but a battle between two people. Only strength is needed in battle. But war is unscrupulous. Every weakness can lead to a crushing defeat." He does not dare to face the fact that his mother died in the mouth of the wolf. He does not dare to face the guilt and despair in his heart. What he is most afraid of is not what he did not turn around to see, but the fact that he ran away. The guilt in his heart makes him not dare to face it, although it is not his fault. Strange said sympathetically. Strange looked back at Daniel, who was kneeling in the darkness and shivering. There is nothing behind Daniel, only darkness. But he did not dare to turn around, until fear and darkness gradually engulfed him. Returning to reality, Daniel knelt on the ground with a dazed expression. Madame Gao's figure had disappeared. If not for the serious blade protecting him, he would have been swallowed by the ghost. Strange did not know why Madame Gao would suddenly run away in such a good situation. But the sky was covered in dark clouds, and there was a faint rumble of thunder. The sudden gust of wind made him tighten his collar. He muttered, "It looks like it's going to rain. Then I don't need busy banishing those mutants in such bad weather. I should be sitting in the attic reading, listening to the rain, and drinking afternoon tea. You have ruined my afternoon tea time. When you are done, you can go to a time zone that is still afternoon." Chenong laughed. Anyway, for a Kamartaj mage, time is meaningless. Chapter 1039. A deafening clap of thunder rumbled across the sky. A gorgeous rainbow came riding the wind and rain, just like a bolt of lightning streaking across the sky. Countless colors converged into a white light that fell not far from Chun-Ong and Strange, illuminating the port area. In the middle of the desolate containers, a charred, complex pattern was imprinted on the ground. The colorful light dissipated, and a man in armor and a red cloak stood on it, carrying a hammer. Thor had just come down from the Rainbow Bridge when he saw two people standing in the ruins of a warehouse looking back at him. He picked up the hammer and spread his hands. "Hi, two Midgardians. Did you see a group of aliens or monsters or spaceships passing by here?" "Yes." Strange shrugged. "Aren't you just one?" Thor looked him up and down, then tiptoed with the hammer and smiled. "It sounds like you know me." Dr. Strange snorted coldly and said, "Of course, once upon a time. The last Sorcerer Supreme before me. The thing he did the most was to help you group of self-proclaimed gods clean up the mess of the Asgardians." Thor smiled. "So you're a sorcerer from Earth." He explained, "I didn't come here for any other reason. I just saw that the group of me GS in Ursa Major seemed to have opened a spatial door to Earth. As the ruler of the 9 realms, Asgard was duty-bound to come and check it out to protect Midgard from invasion. You know, we're not enemies." Chun-Ong looked at the Byakees that had flown into the distance and had to interrupt them. "Those aliens are over there. Don't ask so much, just send them away." Thor turned his head and looked in the direction Chun-Ong was pointing. The Byakees, which had the characteristics of birds, bats, insects, and so on, were just a few black spots in the sky. The GS that had been infected by the tyrannical power were still quietly hibernating on the ground, not far away. A suspicious wriggling sound came from under the cocoon, and a compound eye carefully peeked out from the hole. When it met Thor's eyes, it quickly retracted. The thing inside hesitated for a moment, then suddenly slid out of the cocoon. Its 8 limbs lay limply on the ground. The tentacles were twisted, and the compound eye's lens was covered with a layer of gray. It was a humanoid creature that looked like a moth. Its face was sinister, and its body was twisted. Its death was too horrible to look at. Thor watched with interest for a while, then turned to ask the two of them, "Is it playing dead?" Thor squatted in front of the thing and poked it twice with his hammer. The thing's body was stiff and emitted a fishy smell. The white hairy tentacles all over its body were dim. It looked like it was really dead and stiff. This little thing doesn't seem to be my impression of Jimmy Go, although I haven't seen those bugs for a long time. But their ugly appearance still left a deep impression on me. They don't know how to play dead. Thor observed for a moment, then looked back at the two. Chun-Ong said in a low voice, "Playing dead is a typical animal escape behavior. For a long time, there have been 2 instincts in human genes. In the face of a life-threatening crisis, either we are scared to the point of being unable to move, or our reaction speed and decisiveness increase. The former is our gene for playing dead. Even humans can't avoid this instinctive reaction, let alone animals. This shows that their genes have evolved under the influence of the magic blade and have reached a relatively perfect level. Let's find a place to put them as soon as possible." Chun-Ong looked at the cocoons with a faint look in his eyes. "Otherwise, I'm afraid there will be one more species on Earth. Don't cause trouble for biologists. Otherwise, when they see a higher species evolved by fungi, I'm afraid they will challenge the evolution of species on Earth again. We exterminated the dragons, Chilants, and Bifong in the eastern lands, sealed the ghosts in the 3 islands of Japan, made the snow monsters in the Himalayas extinct, prevented humans from exploring Lake Ness, hid the sea monsters in the Mediterranean Sea. modified the satellite images of the other 8 planetary civilizations, and covered up the Asgardian ruins on Mars. We can't let ordinary people know the truth because of a moment of negligence. Strange shook his head. They already know the truth. S.H.I.L.D. found a laboratory in Africa where the Creator created species not long ago. From a moment, they discovered the gene fragment of the Creator's tag. This secret could no longer be kept. Thor took it over. Just leave them to me. The Vanaheims don't care about this anyway. The 9 worlds have been getting more and more restless recently. Thor looked up at the two of them. He pulled out his hammer and shouted into the sky. Heimdall! A beam of rainbow shot down from the sky and enveloped the alien cocoons. The Mothman, who was pretending to be dead under Thor's feet, screamed, then quickly flapped its wings and fled. Thor reached out and grabbed one of its legs and threw it into the white light. When the light dissipated, there was nothing inside. Chun-Ong returned to the incantation he had drawn earlier. He chanted the incantation of the reverse ritual in a low voice and sometimes in a high voice. A huge rift, like a vertical eye, appeared in the sky. The black void in the rift emitted a powerful suction force. The Bayakis who fled to the courtyard were sucked back without any resistance and swallowed into the rift. Chun-Ong closed the rift with a backhand, but saw Strange looking at him with bright eyes. I'm very curious. Who are you? Of course I'm an Earthling. Chun-Ong erased the various symbols on the ground to prevent anyone from recording them. When he heard Strange's words, he replied without turning his head. It may not be difficult to summon demons or the kin of the old gods, but to be able to send them back is the real skill. Strange looked at him and said, And you are full of confidence. Thor sent back the group of mutant Migos. When he came back, he saw the two of them testing each other, but he had something important to do and had to interrupt them. I don't know anything about your origins, but I didn't come to Earth just for those insects from Ursa Major. I have something more important to ask for your help. Chun-Ong raised his eyes and looked at Thor with a faint smile. Oh, you didn't go to the Avengers, but came to us? The trust between us doesn't seem to have reached that level yet. Thor said solemnly, I didn't go to the Avengers and S.H.L.D. because I can't leak the news to the human government so quickly. And you, I may not know you, but the Sorcerer Supreme in... Thor pondered for a moment and said reluctantly, a sorcerer comparable to the Sorcerer Supreme. You know your world better than me. Your responsibility is to protect this world. So I trust you. I also believe in your ability. The sorcerer who can summon and enslave those alien species is not weak. And no matter what, the Sorcerer Supreme who has guarded Midgard for thousands of years. This matter must be kept secret. I need you to help me. Use your connections and power here to help me find them. But why should I help you? Strange questioned. Thor said solemnly, because you are not only helping me, but also saving the world and carrying out your responsibility. A few months ago, I received news. An extremely dangerous existence in the universe, Thanos, has his eyes on your planet. He learned that the treasures of the universe, the 5 infinite raw stones, have fallen on Earth. But he is afraid of the power of this planet, such as the Soviets on another continent, and the people behind them, the Revolutionary Alliance. So he found several dark forces in the universe that are relatively equal to him, including your mortal enemy, Dorm. I don't know what reason he used to convince them to support him. Now I know that the existence that has allied with him already includes Dorm and Swallowing Star. I don't know who else Thanos has convinced. The adopted son of Thanos, the black-tongued General Ebony Throat, has come to Earth. I want you to help me investigate Ebony Throat's conspiracy and the identities of the other allies of Thanos. The reason why I didn't go to the Avengers is because I know that among the Avengers, someone has betrayed your planet. He succumbed to Thanos and was controlled by Ebony Throat. However, I don't know who he is, and S.H.I.L.D. can no longer be trusted. Chapter 1040. Wait, Chun-Ong interrupted him. What do you mean by asking us to help investigate? His expression turned cold as he said indifferently, You want us to mobilize our connections and inquire about the news everywhere, to ask the heroes from all over the world and the heroes of the underground forces on Earth, to ask if anyone in their territory has caused trouble, and to ask if there have been any suspicious people recently. Is that so? Thor blinked and nodded. That's right. I wanted to find out about the black dung general sent by the Thanatos, and then go to investigate. That's not how investigations are done. Chenong sighed. He took out his mobile phone, sent a message to China, and then said to Thor, Strange is the supreme mage of this generation of Kamartaj. Kamartaj has temples in New York and London. There was originally a temple in Hong Kong, but unfortunately, after the Dom's invasion, it was revoked because of property rights and sovereignty issues. The Bombay Temple is still under construction. The 3 temples of Kamartaj monitor the space activities of the entire Earth and are a line of defense to monitor extraterrestrial invasions. Strange had already understood what Chenong meant at this time. He stretched out his hand in front of his chest, spread his 5 fingers, and slowly twisted a circular magic circle. Strange spread out his right hand, and the magic circle was pulled into a 3-dimensional shape. The spherical 3-dimensional shape floated in his palm, slowly rotating, and countless dots and lines depicted the geographical coordinates of the Earth's surface. We did not monitor the space fluctuations 3 months ago, and the space channel that invaded the Earth recently was only today. Chenong had already received a reply. He turned his head and said, The UPRA's Cognitive World Observation and Response Bureau has not monitored any traces of illegal spacecraft activity in the solar system in the past 3 months. The Space Jump Observatory, the Dark World Observation Bureau, the Human Collective Subconscious Activity Monitoring Center, the General Administration of Dream Analysis, and the Earth Information Observatory have also not reported any relevant reports. Strange was shocked. You also monitor the human collective subconscious. This is a blatant violation of human rights, and you have no right to do this. Chenong rolled his eyes at him. Not only do we monitor the collective subconsciousness of human beings, but we have also established the Center for the Analysis of Human Death and the Soul Administration Bureau. A while ago, Satan in hell protested against our violation of the jurisdiction of the souls in hell. Do you know what the governing body said to him? Strange said with an ugly expression, No matter what, there's no way to justify your infringement. Chenong heaved a sigh and said, They replied that the management of their citizens is their sovereignty. Even reincarnation and the afterlife world should be subject to the government's management, because the concept of the People's Revolutionary Alliance includes everything. As for the detection of the mental activity of other humans, it is necessary to monitor the terrifying activities of the creator of the apocalypse. Hell's jurisdiction over the human souls in America has no basis or reason. It is a subordinate part of the dictatorship of apocalypse. The Human Revolutionary Alliance's mission is to liberate all lives from the control of the apocalypse, so it will not recognize the jurisdiction of heaven and hell over human souls. Thor had a headache from this long list of official documents. He interrupted them. Let's not get entangled in this. I kind of understand what you mean. That is to say, the son of Thanos did not sneak into Earth through the above means. No, you don't understand. Chenong shook his head. Any organizational entity still has a way to monitor its infiltration activities, especially as an entity with jurisdiction and territorial sovereignty. I think Asgard must also have a source of intelligence to monitor the 9 realms. Heimdall is one of them. According to the report of the People's Revolutionary Alliance on the Dark Elves invasion a few years ago, Asgard has a god of guards who is responsible for monitoring the 9 realms. 3 years ago, the People's Revolutionary Alliance used ether particles to create semi-dark matter, ether, to shield the surveillance of your god of guards, Heimdall. Thor explained, Heimdall is doing this to protect the peace of the 9 realms and monitor the actions of forces that threaten the 9 realms. The People's Revolutionary Alliance recognizes Asgard's historical monitoring and protection practices, but after the establishment of the People's Revolutionary Alliance, our land and people will be protected by ourselves, and there is no longer a need for Asgard's intervention. Chenong downplayed the actions of the People's Revolutionary Alliance. Since Asgard sent you to investigate this time, and still needs our assistance. I'm afraid Asgard can no longer monitor the activities of the son of Thanos. Thor had to admit, after it left the Thanos Legion, Heimdall couldn't see it. None of our three parties have monitored the son of Thanos, the black-tongued General Ebony Throat, on his way to Earth. Asgard also has intelligence that Ebony Throat has come to Earth. This shows that one of the Thanos Legion's allies, or several of them, have considerable influence on Earth. They may be native to Earth. Only if it takes the initiative to receive them on Earth can Ebony Throat avoid the monitoring of the People's Revolutionary Alliance in Asgard, avoid the wizard's enchantment, and sneak into Earth. Strange frowned and said, after Dormammu's plot failed, it has no believers or lackeys on Earth. It can't be Dormammu. It can't even get close to Earth itself, and with Kamartaj monitoring it as a mortal enemy, Thanos is not stupid enough to ask it to help meet Ebony Throat. It should be the Thanos Legion's allies that the Asgardians have not yet identified. Chenong explained as he contacted the People's Revolutionary Alliance. Finally, he put down the phone and said, I have told the People's Revolutionary Alliance the general situation. They will send someone to confirm whether Thanos Legion has any intentions, and if so, they will send a fleet to destroy Thanos Legion. The People's Revolutionary Alliance's intellectual world observation and response situation will go through the Akashic records of Earth, through the collective consciousness of mankind, the Arya knowledge, to find traces of Ebony Throat's infiltration into Earth. The Akashic record was a spiritual record that recorded all the information on Earth. A long time ago, mystical scholars had already learned to use the Akashic record to search for books and secrets that had once appeared on Earth. However, a force that called itself the Secret Keeper had controlled the access to the Akashic record. They could decide how the readers contacted the records, and, at the same time, they hunted down those who read the records without their permission. However, after the People's Revolutionary Alliance arrived, they connected to the Akashic records by detecting the collective subconscious of mankind, which was a memory mixed with the collective consciousness of mankind and the consciousness of the Earth. The Secret Keeper appeared to hunt down the readers and was destroyed. Now, the astral souls and the collective consciousness of mankind on Earth have been controlled and protected by the People's Revolutionary Alliance, and a museum of planetary and species memory has been established. The Akashic Records is the only book that contains everything in the museum. When Strange heard this, he was shocked and said, if the Akashic Records can be interpreted by the People's Revolutionary Alliance, then it is possible that he claimed to have read the lost 7 chapters of Xianjun. If that's the case, then wouldn't the magic books that have been lost in history be freely read by the People's Revolutionary Alliance? Thinking about the extremely terrible and mysterious magic books in his memory, the magic that had long been lost. Chapter 1041. After Chenong and Thor finished their discussion, they looked back and saw that the fire trucks had entered the port area and were searching and giving first aid on the scene. SHIELD. Agents were cordoning off the scene, and the entire battle zone had been devastated. Not only were there lumps of flesh and blood that were caught by Jimmy Go and fell from a high altitude, but there were also many SHIELD agents who were injured after being attacked by Jimmy Go were being carried to ambulances for bandaging and rescue. Chenong had to call out to Luke Cage, who was organizing and coordinating. Do you know the person in charge of SHIELD here? Luke Cage was a little surprised that Chenong took the initiative to find him. He turned around and shouted, Jimmy, among the SHIELD agents, a middle-aged Asian turned around. He was a little balding and looked like a civilian. His facial features were more like Chinese. After hearing Luke Cage's call, he trotted all the way to the two of them. Chun-Ong observed calmly for a while before asking, Chinese? What's your name, sir? Jimmy replied in unskilled Cantonese, My surname is Wu. Chun-Ong didn't think about the probability of encountering a Chinese agent from SHIELD and the meaning behind this probability. Anyway, no matter how many plans SHIELD had, it didn't matter in Chenang's plan. He said to Jimmy Wu, You can't send the wounded to the hospital, Jimmy Woo said coldly. I need a reason. They were injured in a battle with extraterrestrial creatures. Obviously, the hospital wouldn't have an extraterrestrial creature injury department. The doctors there obviously don't have the ability to deal with the corresponding risks. Extraterrestrial creatures, even if it's just injuries caused by extraterrestrial creatures, will pose a challenge to your medical system. But this kind of challenge will only make you feel helpless. You need to let the professionals deal with it. Jimmy Woo quickly became serious when he heard Chenang's words. You mean they might be infected? Can't these wounds be treated like normal wounds? Bitten by a dog, you still need a rabies vaccine, Chenang asked. Not to mention aliens. Jimmy Woo made a prompt decision and turned back to order, block the port area, and don't allow anyone to come in without permission. Stop transferring the wounded. Set up an emergency room in the same place and transfer the doctors over. First, deal with the wounds and file the epidemic. Please tell us what you know as soon as possible. Jimmy Woo said to Chenang, prepare an operating theater for me. Chenang ordered. I will send you the list of surgical instruments later. You have to tell us the exact situation first. Jimmy Woo begged. All right. Chenang sighed. First of all, the most important thing for an injured person who had close contact with an extraterrestrial life form, resulting in an exchange of bodily fluids and skin contact, is quarantine. This is the first scene of contact between alien life forms and humans, so it must be sealed off. Anyone who may have direct contact with alien life forms, or even indirectly, cannot leave, except for these guardians, who have epidemic prevention methods. Even customs requires quarantine, not to mention the third type of contact. Secondly, we can't guarantee that humans won't suffer from sequelae after coming into contact with unknown life forms. Based on my past experience, direct contact with anomalies, be it an unknown phenomenon, an abnormal creature, or an extraterrestrial species, is very dangerous. We have to go through the inspection to know what we're facing. So, Chenang spread his hands and said, bring me there. Hey, don't forget my share. Strange also came over and said to Jimmy Woo, I want to examine the injured. Jimmy Woo glanced at the two of them and turned to lead them to the temporary emergency room. On the way, Chenang sent him the list of surgical instruments. Strange took it and said casually, 3 years ago, I was the best neurosurgeon in New York City. Chenang turned back and said, one of. Strange smiled and shook his head. One of. He looked at the list and gradually frowned. His horse-like face grew longer and longer. He put down the list and said with a smile, interesting. You think the problem is neurological? You've prepared the most cutting-edge neurosurgical instruments. Is there a problem? Chenang said perfunctorily. Strange said, I thought I would see silver powder, salt, mummy powder, gems, gold, and all kinds of herbs. An exorcist actually needs to use surgery to solve the sequelae of supernatural injuries. Did you do exorcism rituals like this in the past? I'm not an exorcist. I'm an insurance investigator. Chenang said calmly. Because the relevant industry is not perfect, I have to learn a little more. After all, it's not a burden to have more skills. In our industry, the problems we need to deal with are very cutting edge, but the relevant logistics development is very poor. After all, we can't tell the doctor that this victim was injured because of a werewolf, vampire, snowman, or evil spirit attack. When I was dealing with the Oregon Mountain Hotel case, codenamed Shining, because of the sudden emergency, I handed the victim over to the hospital and told the victim the relevant symptoms and treatment methods. But those quacks still diagnosed the patient with heart paralysis. As a result, none of the 3 victims were sent off the operating table alive. The doctor doesn't know the difference between an evil spirit attack and heart paralysis. This is just the simplest finishing move I've encountered. The victims who survived the sudden emergency need to be treated for all kinds of strange injuries. If I don't want the victim of a vampire attack to get up and eat people after the rescue is unsuccessful. If I don't want the victim of a werewolf attack to see the full moon in the sky after treatment, suddenly transform and kill his whole family. If I don't want the victim of an evil spirit to die a horrible death in the hospital and turn into a malicious spirit to harm people, you have to learn to deal with these things yourself and not hand them over to society. Because sometimes society can't distinguish things beyond common sense. Unbelievable. Strange shook his head. While the two of them were talking, they had already reached the temporary emergency room. Chunong skillfully took off the white coat hanging on the side and put it on. Then, he did a full set of cleaning and sterile protection. Strange looked at him and felt that this insurance investigator was really too skilled. Even the way he lifted the scalpel was a little too skillful. Even the way he lifted the scalpel was as standard as a textbook. Chunong chose a series of combinations of large blades to small blades. The smallest blade was only 0.5 millimeters wide. An ordinary person's hand would tremble constantly when threading a needle, and they would need to repeat the same mistake several times to align the needle. If it was on the operating table, the patient would probably be dead in the time it took for him to hold his breath. Chapter 1042. Therefore, when Strange saw Chunong's steady hands, which seemed to be made of steel, he was sure that this investigator was not at the level of those outside the door. Chunong skillfully cut open the skin on the side of the shoulder of the S.H.L.D. agent who had been scratched on the shoulder. His movements were as precise as if he had repeated them thousands of times. In fact, he had also repeated them thousands of times at the cost of the blood and tears of the test subjects on the experiment table. When Chunong first started studying surgery, he had to get a doctorate in medicine because he could not find a top surgeon who participated in his illegal experiments. Then he used people in a laboratory to train his skills to the top. At the beginning, Chunong had also made mistakes. However, he was always able to eliminate his mistakes in a very short time. With his serious attitude, he only killed a few test subjects for practice before he reached the top level. Later, he gradually eliminated the experimental research method of surgery. But thanks to Chunong's strange hobby of cutting two people from time to time to restore his touch, his technique never regressed. When he cut open the skin, Chunong gestured for him to retract the retractor. Strange seemed to explode and asked Chunong to follow him. "You asked me to retract the retractor. I haven't retracted the retractor for anyone since I graduated. From a resident to an attending physician, no one dared to ask me to retract the retractor for them. Are you saying that you don't know how?" Chunong lowered his head and asked him. "I'm saying that I'll be the chief surgeon." Strange stared at him and said. Chunong shook his head. "Your hand is useless. I've already cured it." Strange growled in a low voice. He was so proud of his former profession that even after he became the Sorcerer Supreme, he did not want others to call him Sorcerer Strange. Instead, he insisted on calling himself Dr. Strange. Chunong's indifferent attitude infuriated him. "How did you cure it?" Chunong asked back. Strange was stunned for a moment. Then, he said vaguely, "I used my soul to guide my body and repair my hand. Chakra, true energy and spirituality. You should be very familiar with this." When Strange saw Chunong looking at him with a "are you kidding me" expression, Chunong slowly said, "So, you don't know how your hand was cured. Have you ever picked up a scalpel after your hand was crippled?" Strange was speechless. He asked in a low voice, "Does soul possession count?" Chunong continued to stare at him with a "what do you think" expression. "But I was once the best neurosurgeon in New York, and you are just a charlatan, a professional exorcist. Mysticism is your specialty, but can you please step away from my operating table?" Chunong slowly took off his gloves and said faintly, "Can I say, are you questioning my qualifications?" "I am doubting your qualifications," Strange said coldly. Chunong's heart was unmoved. He even wanted to laugh. The entire human race was created by him on the operating table. Now, there was a descendant of a monkey jumping out to question his ability to perform surgery. "Do you know that your genes are marked by my surgery?" But Chunong could not use this as an excuse. This was an unspeakable qualification. 10 years ago, during the investigation of the Kayako Mansion case, the victim's stomach was stuffed with a lot of his own body tissues. They were all parts of the victim's body that disappeared after being attacked by Zobo and appeared in the stomach. The victim with the most parts had 2 palms, half of his shoulder, and his abdomen, including half of his intestines. Almost 1/5 of his body tissues were stuffed into his stomach. I was the one who performed the surgery and removed them, saving the victim's life. As Chenong spoke, a projection appeared in midair, displaying the relevant files and medical records. 8 years ago, during the cult blood sacrifice case, 8 victims were sacrificed by the cult leader in a rather creative way. Their ribs were opened and spread out like wings, exposing their internal organs. Their skin tissues were dissected like wings. The skin on their abdomen was connected to the muscle tissue on their back, and the skin was spread open together with the skin and attached to a cross. Their internal organs were removed and hung in front of the victims for cardiopulmonary bypass. The victims watched as their internal organs circulated in front of them. When I saved them, they were like angels with wings made of flesh and blood. But they were still alive. This case is known as a case that challenges the limits of surgery. You should have heard of it. Strange said with a trembling voice, "This has indeed aroused the interest of many surgeons, including me. You all think that the cult leader is a criminal with extremely high surgical standards, and even think that he has challenged the limits of human physiology. But have you ever thought, if he has reached the limits, then what about the person who saved the victims and performed the recovery surgery?" Strange's face paled. Impossible. No one can be successfully rescued in that kind of situation. With a light tap from Chunong, the information of these people appeared in the projection. Even their surviving photos were very detailed. In the information, these people lived like normal people, and to this day, they were living ordinary lives in a small rural town in the United States. It was me. I created several surgical techniques, and under simple and crude conditions, I completed the difficult surgery of organ recovery, rib repair, and muscle and skin replantation. Strange stared at the surgical records and treatment, his face pale. Chen Ong continued to attack him. Have you ever seen a case where hair strands grew into the whole body after a hair transplant, including blood vessels, nerves, and internal organs? The Southeast Asian ghost case. I saved the victim. I spent 3 days to remove all the hair from her body. Have you ever seen a case where a person suffered extensive burns, contusions, and nerve damage while they were asleep? There were also cases where they were close to brain death due to stress. The injuries suffered by each victim were different. The only similarity was that the nerves were highly damaged. The Elm Street Freddy case. I cured the victim. The 6 survivors are now able to live normal lives. Have you ever seen a patient who, after being burned for more than 10 years, didn't die because of their strong spirit and was on the brink of death? The Silent Hill case. After the victim, Elisa, was rescued, I performed a skin graft surgery on her. The Boeing 777 parasite case at JFK International Airport. I created the electroshock anesthesia to anesthetize the parasites and the craniotomy to remove the parasites from brain. The Southeast Asian voodoo case. I was the one who performed the surgery to remove the parasites. The Shaolin temples, Shi Yongda's family's pure yang internal energy went awry and turned into stiff corpses. I was the one who repaired their spinal nerves. Have you ever heard of Fugong disease? Back then, the Japanese government asked me to study the demi-humans. I also provided the Federation with a psychiatric analysis report. Have you heard of Hannibal? His status in the Federation's psychological medicine is no lower than yours. I discussed psychoanalysis with him, and, in the end, he was sent to a mental hospital. Listening to this glorious resume, Strange could not bring himself to object at all. Only an expert would know that this series of creative and difficult surgeries surpassed at least 30 years of human medical science. In the field of surgery, when Strange was still worshipping the originality of a method to repair nerves, Chunong had completed a series of surgeries that could be said to be unprecedentedly difficult. It was groundbreaking. Even the most trivial surgical step was epical and could be written in a lancet. If it was not for his pride as the supreme sorcerer, Strange would have knelt down in front of him. This was not self-abasement, but the truth of Mabai's surgical field. Chun-Ong picked up the scalpel with satisfaction and ordered, "Retract the retractor." Strange obediently pulled open the muscle tissue and properly exposed the surgical field. Chun-Ong looked at the spinal nerve in his field of vision. The black fungus wrapped around the nerve like a black thread. When Strange noticed this, he sucked in a cold breath. The fungus was like a living thing. It was parasitic on the nerve, and it was still constantly moving towards the brain. One could imagine the potential risks involved in this. An agent from SHIELD had already informed Jimmy Woo, who was waiting outside, about this. Those who knew were all shocked. Chapter 1043. Chun Ang's adjusted surgical posture could be said to be one of the best. Strange only realized that he did not notice when Chun Ang adjusted the patient's surgical posture, but the surgical field of view of the patient's brachial plexus could be clearly seen through the retractor's surgical field of view. The ivory white nerves were as thin as silver threads and as thick as tendons. They were surrounded by a membrane-like sheath. The black fungus was linear and had already grown into the membrane-like sheath. The black fungus was entangled with the nerves. It was parasitic on the nerves, and the spreading black veins on the ivory white nerves were exceptionally conspicuous. It was even slowly wriggling, which made Strange's scalp tingle. The brachial plexus was composed of the anterior branches of the 5th to 8th cervical nerves and most of the anterior branches of the 1st thoracic nerve. It penetrated through the space between the scalenus muscles, ran behind the subclavian artery, and entered the armpit through the back of the clavicle. The fibers from the 5 roots of the brachial plexus were first synthesized into the upper, middle, and lower trunks. The branches of the 3 trunks surrounded the axillary artery to form the medial, lateral, and posterior bundles. The branches of the posterior bundles were mainly distributed to the upper limbs and some superficial thoracic and dorsal muscles. However, the fungus that infected the wound had taken root in the medial, lateral, and posterior bundles. On one side, it spread from the 3 trunks to the brain, and on the other side, it spread to the thoracic and dorsal nerves, long thoracic nerves, axillary nerves, musculocutaneous nerves, median nerves, radial nerves, and ulnar nerves. The main nerve roots had been infected. The thinnest part of the fungal infection had already spread to the nerve branches of the upper thoracic, dorsal, and deep cervical muscles. If the fungus infected the nerve endings, the consequences would be unimaginable. The patient's entire upper limbs would be controlled by the parasite. However, there was no time to care about the upper limbs nerves. The most complicated part of the brain was the cistern region, which was located at the bottom of the brain. It was a complex area where the cerebrum, brainstem, and cerebellum intersected. The neural activity here was complex and precise. It was the most important and fatal area of the human body. It could be said that although surgery on the cerebral cortex and lobes was important, even if the surgery failed or some brain tissue was accidentally removed, it would not matter much. The patient would not die immediately. At most, he would have some sequelae, such as daze, low intelligence, and slow reaction time. In the worst-case scenario, he would become a vegetable. It would also give the attending physician a long time to clear his name. There was enough time and reason for the doctor to use all kinds of excuses to shirk responsibility. Therefore, this part of the brain had been used for various important medical breakthroughs, such as the infamous lobotomy surgery of the last century. Didn't mental patients who had most of their frontal lobes removed still live very healthy lives? Moreover, it was quiet and docile like a small animal, so much so that this surgery was hailed as the dawn of curing mental illness. This sensational result lasted until people discovered that the reason why the mental patients no longer acted up was because they had lost the ability to act up. It was because they had become semi-vegetative, the most essential ability that distinguishes humans from other animals. Thinking had been stripped away. When a mechanism of the treatment was discovered, the surgery was declared illegal. However, the cisterna was different from the lobes of the brain, which were areas that could be used to produce results in the last century. Before the invention of neurosurgery microscopy, the cisterna was known as a forbidden area. The mortality rate of surgeries performed there was basically equivalent to terminal illness. It was also because neurosurgery microscopy broke through the forbidden area of the cisterna that it was qualified to be called the crown of surgery. As a former neurosurgeon who was proud of his profession and had dedicated his life to it, Strange knew that his hands were crippled by a car accident, and he had no choice but to switch to a magic profession. Of course, he knew how tricky this position was. Judging from the danger of the fungus parasitizing the nerves, once it spread to the cisterna, with a concentration of nerves there, it was basically impossible to save it. He had to remind Chunong, we have to stop it from spreading to the cisterna. Once it reaches the cerebellomedullary cisterna and the anterior cisterna, it can infect the brainstem and cerebral plexus and spread down to the spine. If the infection reaches that level, it's basically hopeless. Chunong, however, calmly observed the fungal silk and said, "It's fine." Strange said anxiously, "We have to hurry. You still have the mood to say it's fine now?" Chunong replied unhurriedly, "It's really fine. The fungus has not developed a nerve plexus. It is still a simple nervous structure. It can be seen that it has parasitized the human nerves, allowing it to imitate the human nervous structure, but it has not continued to develop. It's really something to be thankful for. This time it's fine." Strange watched the fungus continue to spread on the nerves, feeling very anxious. But out of confidence in his profession, he had to voice his doubts. "I think the situation is very bad. Once the fungus infects the brain, we can declare the patient dead." "Young man, stay calm. The situation is not as bad as you think," Chunong said unhurriedly and calmly. Strange was so anxious that he jumped. "Isn't this the worst? We are sitting back and watching the worst develop. What could be worse than this? In my career as a surgeon, this is the easiest." Chunong sighed. "There are many more unlucky than this. For example, finding the nerve plexus on the infected fungus proves that the fungus is not only capable of simple nervous reactions, but can think and carry out complex neural activities. That would be a more difficult situation. It will react to your actions in a more complicated way." Strange understood Chunang's words, and it was precisely because he understood that he felt fear. Once the fungus could carry out complex neural activities, it would be smarter than a parasite in the brain in the best-case scenario. And they did not understand this fungal parasite at all, did not know how it would react to external stimuli, and did not know how the relevant drugs would stimulate it. Strange could not help but break out in a cold sweat. "This is really a worse situation." "That's nothing," Chunong sneered. "Don't forget, these fungus came from a highly intelligent alien race. Before the operation, I had already prepared for it to develop a complex nervous system. The better ones would have the intelligence of a dog, and the worse ones would have the intelligence of a 6-year-old dolphin. Think about it. If the fungus parasitizing the nerves had the thinking ability of a 6-year-old, Strange shuddered. That would be an impossible operation. Surgery was an extremely delicate and precise work, and doctors hated variables the most. A 6-year-old parasitizing the patient's nerves was no longer a variable. It was a disaster. Chapter 1044. Strange asked as he helped with the retractor. "I can't imagine a situation more complicated than this." In the Southeast Asian ghost case, the victim situation was even more complicated. Chunong revealed a slightly frightened expression. "By the time I found the victim, it was already too late. She had been transplanted with a vengeful ghost's body, and her hair was parasitized by the vengeful ghost. The victim felt that her scalp was getting itchier by the day, and in the end, she couldn't stand the itchiness anymore. She scratched her scalp with all her might. She scratched until she was covered in blood, and her flesh was torn. Later, she found that there was a faint trace of hair underneath the wound, so she used a pair of scissors to peel her scalp open, and there was hair growing in her flesh. She found that the blood vessels under her arm were turning black, so she used a pair of scissors to cut it open, and it was hair again. After that, she went crazy. The local police station found that she was severely self-harming and sent her to a mental hospital. A reputable local psychiatrist contacted me. When I arrived, there was hair growing all over her body tissues. She was tied to the bed, and her eyes were wide open. When I saw her, her eyeballs were also growing hair. She was better off dead than alive. Chunong raised his head and smiled. Luckily, she bought our insurance. Later, I found out that her situation was indeed troublesome. The most troublesome thing was that there was a hairy ghost parasitized in her hair. That hairy ghost had killed at least 13 people. Its resentment and spiritual energy were very strong, and it had a high IQ. It even knew how to scare me. The difficulty of his surgery was very high. An ordinary doctor would probably be pulled into her stomach by the dense head technique right after he performed the laparotomy. One of my assistants had his hand grabbed by the hair and was pulled into his abdomen. He was so scared that he dropped the retractor and struggled with all his might. I helped him cut off the hair that was tangled in his hand, and he ran away without looking back. After the surgery, I went to find him again and helped him remove the hair that had entered his body through the wound on his right hand. If he hadn't run away, I could have helped him deal with it. If he ran away, I can't just leave the patient who just had a laparotomy to go and catch him, right? Chenong joked. Strange knew that surgeries were very boring. Usually, doctors would chat with patients in the operating theater. They did not like to chat with patients. Doctors who valued authority more, or patients who could not speak under general anesthesia, would chat with nurses or assistants. It was also very common for them to talk about surgical cases. The profession of a doctor was busy and boring. Aside from those old jokes, they could only talk about surgical cases. Strange liked to chat with his assistants and talk about strange cases when he was bored during surgeries. But when they talked about such strange cases that were a mixture of horror, suspense, mystery, and professionalism, he could not help but concentrate on learning from them. Whether it was his experience as a doctor in surgery or his experience as a sorcerer in exorcism. This was the first time he had experienced such a peculiar exchange that was a mixture of academic exchange and sensory stimulation. In such a situation, the first thing to do is to destroy the parasite's consciousness. But you must also note that in the later stages of parasitism, when the victim no longer has the ability to survive, their lives are actually maintained by the parasite. So, first of all, you must think of a way to take over the victim's life. Then, when the parasite can't react in time, you must seal or paralyze its consciousness at lightning speed. But be careful not to kill the parasite. Then, you must establish a cycle to maintain the victim's life. Bit by bit, you must remove the parasite's consciousness and repair the victim's body. In such a situation, it is usually very difficult for the victim to recover. At this time, we must perform some small modifications on them to ensure their survival. As Chenong spoke, he had already peeled off the parasite's black thread from the membrane sheath. His technique was clean and neat, and in strange size, it was incomparably beautiful. Chenong used an extremely fine needle to absorb a little of the silver solution and explained, "The silver solution that has been blessed by the holy light will not stimulate the nerves." Then, he injected the silver solution into the sheath and focused his mind, controlling the silver solution to cover the nerves. Then, he took out a special laser emitter and explained to Strange, "The holy light generator is made up of holy light rubies that have been precipitated by faith and synthesized from the prayers of at least 100,000 believers through a special high-energy reaction. By activating this special ruby, you can create holy light." Using the holy light generator, Chenong shot out a pure white high-energy laser. Strange almost couldn't help but stop him. Using a laser to irradiate a patient's nerves was basically murderous. The laser was only 1/100th the thickness of a strand of hair. A single tremble of Chenong's hand could cause a deviation of hundreds of times. Strange observed carefully, asking from time to time, "Is the silver solution used to protect the nerves?" Although the holy light is of a very high energy level, it only causes serious damage to special energy. It is completely harmless to the human body and even beneficial. The silver solution is used to react with the holy light to create the special substance holy light silver, which is used to protect the nerve from the damage of these fungi. This way, we can use the holy light to stimulate the fungi. The white nerves were gradually coated with a layer of silver. Under the shadowless lamp, they flashed with sacred and beautiful colors. Compared to the human body's muscle tissue and blood vessels, it was astonishingly beautiful. But only people like Chenong and Strange could appreciate such beauty. Chenong sighed. Every time I see such beautiful colors under the microscope, I'm mesmerized. Yes, Strange exclaimed. It's so beautiful, it's hard to imagine. Is the holy silver really harmless to the human body? Chun Ong casually explained, the holy silver surgery is a simplified version of the holy silver warriors of the Vatican. The Vatican has been entangled with the dark creatures for thousands of years. The warriors they train to hunt down the most dangerous blood breeds, werewolves, and dark wizards are called holy silver. Do you know how the holy silver warriors are trained? Strange pondered for a moment and said, I've heard of it, but this is an absolute secret of the Vatican, so even Kamartaj doesn't know. There's no need to keep it a secret anymore. The old method has been eliminated. Chenong shook his head and smiled. Through prayers and secret methods, the Vatican turns silver into a mercury-like silver solution called holy silver. Holy silver warriors are people who can inject holy silver into their blood vessels and replace the blood in their body without dying. The mortality rate of this kind of holy silver warrior is shocking. First, inject a little holy silver, and if there's no serious rejection reaction, then proceed to the next step. Continuously increase the amount of injection, and finally, all the blood in the body is silverized, turning into a holy silver warrior. Chenong scolded. How stupid. Strange couldn't help but scold the Vatican as well. This is really a method that only idiots with silver stuffed in their brains can come up with. So, when the Vatican asked me to improve the Holy Silver Warrior's transformation method, I immediately discovered that this material must be extremely compatible with the human body in order to allow the warriors who use this brainless transformation method to survive. Later, I improved the production process of Holy Silver, created a new Holy Silver solution, invented the Holy Silver surgery, and invented the Holy Light generator. Chin Ong said proudly, I turned the Holy Silver into a material that is highly compatible with the human body and can even coexist with living creatures. The current Holy Silver plating nerve surgery is a simplified version of the new Holy Silver Warrior surgery. The new Holy Silver Warrior's blood vessels are silverized, and the blood cells and Holy Silver combine, showing a beautiful silver color. They're called Silver Blood Warriors. The compatibility of Silver Blood Warriors is far stronger than the old Holy Silver Warriors, but the mortality rate is close to zero. So far, there hasn't been a single case of transformation failure. Because of the rapid decrease in the mortality rate, the quality of a new Holy Silver Warriors is far inferior to the old Holy Silver Warriors who had gone through hundreds of battles, struggled to survive on the verge of death, and even survived the cruel transformation. But I developed further on the original Holy Silver transformation, creating the nerve plating technique and the bone marrow silver technique. I developed the Silver Blood Warriors, blood vessel and blood cell silver surgery, the Divine Warriors, nerve modification silver surgery, and the Holy Blood Warriors who strengthen both at the same time, blood cell and nerve cell double modification, and finally the Half Angel, stem cell silver transformation. Now in Europe, the dark creatures have been utterly defeated by the Vatican's new Holy Silver Warriors, and I have been honored as the Great Red Sage by the Vatican. Chenong recounted his past glory. Why haven't I heard of this? Strange said in shock. Oh, Chenong said nonchalantly. This title has long been removed after I created the lifeblood surgery for the vampires. Although the two were talking about these secrets that ordinary people would not hear, their minds were still focused on the surgery, and Chun Eng's hands did not even tremble. At the place where the fungus had invaded the nerve, where the black thread and the nerve came into contact, he used holy light to coat the fungus with a layer of holy silver, and then stimulated the fungus with high-energy holy light, causing it to shrink and retract its tiny tentacles. In the end, the fungus shrunk into a ball and attached to the nerve like a black tumor. Chun Ong wrapped it in holy silver solution, and the fungus activity was reduced to its lowest before Chun Ong cut it off with a scalpel. Putting the silver tumor in a container next to him, Chun Ong asked Strange to suture it while he took off his gloves and said to Jimmy Woo, "Prepare a lab for me. I want to study the nature of this fungus." Strange asked in return, "The surgery is already a success. Aren't you going to do it for others?" Chun Ong rolled his eyes at him. I want to study the nature of the fungus before I can invent a new surgical method to solve this problem. Strange said, the holy silver surgery was a success. Universality. Chenong frowned and shook his head. I need to create a universal surgery so that any qualified neurosurgeon can remove these fungus. Do you want them to learn how to use their mind to coat it with holy silver? Is the precision of the holy light laser something that surgeons can achieve? Before your hand was crippled, you might have learned it after a few months of training, but for those mediocre people. Also, do you know how expensive a holy silver is? Strange looked at the used holy silver solution and said, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Jimmy Woo smiled and said, SHIELD will pay for the surgical supplies. $80 million. Chen Ong said calmly. Who asked those vampires to be so rich? The market price has been inflated by them, and now even the Vatican can't help but secretly sell a few every month. The blood transplant surgery I invented can be used with holy silver. Vampires can avoid the damage of sunlight and become daywalkers if their blood vessels are coated with holy blood silver. Those vampires have gone crazy to collect the surgical supplies. The price I'm talking about is the market price 3 years ago. After I left Europe, I heard that because the American vampires entered the market, the price increased several times. The Vatican had no choice but to launch an anti-corruption campaign to punish the cardinals for stealing and selling holy silver. I have to find out more about the current price. I'll go prepare the laboratory for the doctor right now. Jimmy Woo no longer mentioned the reimbursement of the surgical supplies and turned to leave awkwardly. Strange secretly clicked his tongue. As a doctor, he knew very well that a human life was priceless, but saving a human life had a cost. His subordinates had also encountered patients who could not afford the medical fees and could only wait for death. Therefore, he could understand the cost of the surgery, and he would not be like some saints who would say that saving lives was more important. He also understood that Chen Ong, who could perform unprecedented complicated surgery, was terrifying, but to be able to simplify the surgery and make it a standard surgery that every surgeon could complete was even greater. The person who solved difficult problems was powerful, but the person who set the standard was even greater. Chapter 1045. Hemostatic Forceps. Chen Ong ordered the assistant next to him as he immersed himself in the surgery. Strange handed him a pair of mosquito hemostatic forceps and could not help but say, "You can totally leave these things to the nurses, but you won't let the nurses from SHLD assist you in the surgery. I'm the attending physician of the neurosurgery department, the best in New York, or at least one of the best. Even if you're great in the field of neurosurgery, I won't listen to you." Surgical scissors. Chenong ignored him and continued to order. Strange had no choice but to obediently hand him the surgical scissors and continued to complain, "I can't be an anesthetist, a nurse, and an assistant physician. You have to promise me that I'll be the chief surgeon for the next surgery." Basin. Chen Ong continued to order indifferently. Strange grabbed the basin containing the surgical waste next to him and moved it to Chen Ong. Chen Ong used the surgical forceps to clamp down on a fungal creature that was twisting slightly like a black leech and threw it into the waste basin. He took off his mask and latex gloves and said to Strange, "Suture the wound and give this to SHIELD. Don't worry, it's not just the next surgery. All the surgeries in the future are yours. I've already recorded the surgery process. You can watch the video later and learn. I'll leave the next surgery to you." Strange was caught off guard. He counted the gauze while making preparations for the suture and, at the same time, said in surprise, "What do you mean, leave it to me? There are still 13 patients here. Even if we perform 2 surgeries at the same time, we'll have to work continuously for at least 3 days. You can't push all this to me." Chenong took off his gloves and said calmly, "I've extracted the chemical components from the fungal tissue that can anesthetize them and solve the most critical problem. I've also accompanied you in 3 surgeries to remove the parasitic fungus from the bodies of those SHLD agents. I've already set the surgical standards. Don't tell me that you haven't learned it after 3 surgeries." "Of course I've learned it. I learned it the first time you did it," Strange said reflexively. refusing to admit defeat. However, he somehow felt that his tone was a little hollow. God, have mercy on me. When did I, Dr. Strange, have to tell anyone that I've learned it? He hadn't said this since he graduated from medical school. If he said it out loud, he would feel like he was admitting defeat to Chenong and lowering his head. Although Strange knew that his skills were indeed inferior to this annoying fellow, he could not admit defeat in terms of confidence. But these are our shared missions. You can't throw them to me. Strange complained. I was the one who discovered the parasitic fungus. I was the one who performed the first successful surgery. I was also the one who cultivated the alien fungus. I was the one who discovered their life characteristics. I extracted the chemical components that slowed down the fungus life activities and established the standard for subsequent surgeries. Now, according to my standard, any doctor with 3 years of neurosurgery experience, even if he was a pig, should know how to perform surgery. I built the microscopic stripping surgery for the parasitic extraterrestrial fungus from scratch. And now you still want me to do the work of these technicians? What use do you have in the world of medicine? Chenong questioned disdainfully. Strange was so angry that his blood boiled, and he barely managed to swallow that mouthful of blood. In the field of neurosurgery, skills and qualifications were the most important. His qualifications and skills were crushed by Chenong, so naturally, he could not speak loudly in front of Chenong. Only one sentence was still surging in his stomach. F***CK, the technicians. F***CK, the technicians. Also, Chenong packed his things and was about to turn around and leave the operating room. In the end, he said, I'm not a dog raised by S.H.I.L.D. I stayed to study a way to treat them out of my humanitarian duty as half a doctor, and also out of my duty as an insurance investigator to deal with the aftermath. Since we've already developed the technical standard and they didn't buy our insurance, why should I stay to treat them? Where are you going? Strange had already sutured the patient and asked. Chenong didn't even look back. Go and investigate what Thor said. Hey, this matter doesn't seem to have anything to do with you. An insurance investigator. Strange said behind him. Chenong sighed. Who said it doesn't matter? Do you know how many people have insured Earth? In theory, any person or species with Earth citizenship is eligible to insure Earth. So, including environmental protection organizations, industrial groups like Stark, and even some Earth species that have been stranded in outer space, they have all insured Earth. You're just looking for an excuse. Strange laughed. Chenong explained helplessly some time ago, when the Human Revolutionary Alliance was developing its financial business on the Milky Way star, they acquired a cosmic banking group. The first batch of insurance business included a non-famous mercenary group. A raccoon in the Guardian of the Galaxy has Earth citizenship, so it insured Earth, although it seems to only want to make a lot of money after Earth is destroyed. There's also the duck alien, Strange Duck Howard. His uncle Donald was born on Earth and has Earth citizenship by default. He's a rich man, one of the richest people in the Milky Way. He insured 50 million star dollars. Earth citizenship, Russian space heroes, space dogs Layla and Cosmo. After they were renaturalized in the Soviet Union, they insured most of their money to Earth. Speaking of which, the Soviet Union launched more than a dozen space dogs in the Milky Way in order to experiment with manned spaceflight. They did the best. The first space dog among them, Layla, was launched and activated the mysterious genes left behind by the apocalypse in the experiment of creating Earth species in the cosmic radiation, gaining superintelligence and superpowers. Later, Layla made a name for himself in the Milky Way galaxy. When the Soviet Union launched other space dogs, they were secretly taken into the Milky Way galaxy and used their own cosmic radiation to activate the mysterious genes. This was the biggest mystery of the Soviet satellites back then, the mystery of the disappearance of the experimental dogs. In order to solve this mystery, the Soviets carried a few dogs in most of the satellites they launched one after another. As a result, it indirectly promoted the formation of the famous space scavenger mercenary group, Space Dogs. They are much more famous than those non-famous mercenary groups, such as the Guardians of the Galaxy. In the Milky Way galaxy, Earth is a classic example of humans being worse than dogs. Now, These space dogs have returned to their motherland, the Soviet Union, and joined the Black Star Troopers. The Soviets are considering forming a Black Star Troopers army that includes the Soviet war bears, war dogs, and giant squids, to reward other Earth species that have made great contributions to the Soviets. Have you considered the issue of animal ethics? Strange asked after a moment of silence. Chenong smiled. After admitting that you monkeys have human rights, the CPP no longer has these problems. Since ancient monkeys can have the rights of humans after evolution, why can't other animals? Chenong waved his hand. The CPP checked Akasha's records and found that someone had indeed used black magic rituals to establish a space channel to outer space, and used the unique subspace structure of Hell to hide most of the traces. Now the CPP has sent an investigation team to Hell to demand an explanation from Satan. The fleet to attack the Thanos is also ready to set off. Where does the space channel lead to? Strange asked. Chenong smiled. The CPP has strict surveillance. The Indian subcontinent has your Khmer Taj. Europe has the Vatican and the Dark Creatures. North America has the Avengers. South America has the Nazis. Where else can it go? Of course, it's the Black Continent, Africa. The space channel leads to Egypt. It should be the work of the local wizards. I have already locked on to the suspect. You're going to Egypt? Strange glanced at the luggage Chenong had prepared and asked. Chenong nodded. Yes, I asked S.H.I.E.L.D. to send me to Egypt. They owe me a sacred silver potion, and Cyclops owes me a favor. They were going to recruit me before, but now that they know the market price of sacred silver, they don't dare mention it again. Huh. Well, Muhu should have left Egypt. Strange frowned. Do you know why he went to Africa? Yes. Chenong lowered his head and glanced at the picture of the target. That jet black, dirty, and sloppy local magus was as inconspicuous as most of the magi in southern Africa. However, there was a brand scar on the target's neck that was slightly different. A voodoo sect wizard, nothing special. Chapter 1046. The next morning, Chenong, who had a good rest for the night, came to a nearby temporary airport. After a small half of the port area was blocked, there were stretches of concrete poured roads here as a runway, but the requirement for the runway for large passenger planes are so high that it has reached a demanding level. So, it is a Quinjet that is parked here. As soon as Chenong walked under the fighter, he saw Wu Jimmy put down the rear hatch and came out. Hey, this is a big guy, specially transferred from the headquarters for you. It is the most advanced fighter in the United States. It only takes 3 hours to fly to Africa. It takes off and lands a high price. Wu Jimmy was full of smiles and introduced enthusiastically. How high is it? Chenong handed his luggage to him and walked in calmly. Is it as high as 280 million? 280 million, the current market price of a dose of sacred silver potion. Chenong just checked in the evening. Wu Jimmy's face froze. He looked as embarrassed as if he had been punched in the face, and he still had a smile. Agent May of S.H.I.E.L.D. sighed in her heart. After all, Wu has been in the field for a long time. His professional level needs to be improved. If the former One-Eye director was here, with his thick skin, he would definitely be able to maintain his composure. However, not everyone has the level of One-Eye director Nick. He is a black-bellied character who can compete with elite politicians, and his skin color is too cheating. Not to mention whether Nick has lost the ability to blush. Even if he blushes, no one will notice it. Chenong got on the Quinjet, and after glancing around, he looked disappointed. The interior space of the Quinjet is narrow. There are 2 pilot seats in the front of the opposite plane, both of which are occupied. The remaining space can't even fit a small main battle tank. Chenong said with emotion, I heard that the Quinjet was finalized during World War II. I didn't expect it to be the best fighter in the United States. Over the past few years, the 7th-generation space fighters of the Revolutionary Alliance have been rapidly being replaced. The near-Earth planetary orbit space planes, small space battleships, and small to medium-sized spaceships have all been updated twice. The 2 S.H.I.E.L.D. Agents following Chen Ong suddenly had a dark expression on their faces. We entertained you so warmly, and we even took out S.H.I.E.L.D. S most advanced Quinjet as a means of transportation. Do you need to slap us in the face like this? Chen Ong found a seat and sat down. Agent May sat next to him. The rear hatch slowly closed. Chen Ong turned to look at Detective May and said, "All these years, haven't you thought about going back to your motherland to take a look?" Agent May did not expect Chen Ong to ask her this question. She was stunned for a moment, then shook her head and smiled. "Thank you for your kindness, but America is my motherland now. I was born here, grew up here, and I'm willing to die for it. Besides, which one is your motherland? The one this planet originated from 5,000 years ago, or the one that came from another universe 3 years ago?" Chen Ong said, "Both motherland is a cultural term. It exists in the bloodline and cultural heritage. Even if it's a universe away, as long as we recognize the will of the Chinese civilization, he will be our compatriot. On the contrary, even if he is of the same origin, if he betrays will of China, then China will no longer be his motherland." Chen Ong turned his head and said calmly, "Just like you." May's expression was very ugly. She wanted to say something, but Chen Ong was no longer interested in listening to her. At this time, the person in the co-pilot seat suddenly turned around and said, "A country is a political entity formed by people, and motherland is a cultural concept. They should be separated, not mixed together." Chen Ong did not show any surprise when he saw him. He just said lightly, "The basic unit of the Revolutionary Alliance is a civilization, not a country. You don't seem surprised to see me." Strange said lightly. He seemed to have regained his usual easygoing demeanor. Chen Ong looked at the dark circles under his eyes and said with emotion, "I'm surprised that you didn't take advantage of this time to rest, but came to show off in front of me." "Show off what?" Strange asked, even though he knew the answer. "I'm not showing off. I finished 2 3-day missions in one night, and I did it alone with 2 assistants. They're all here to gain experience, and they're only at the level of pulling the retractor. I alone completed 13 surgeries. The so-called 13 operations in 3 days is just what you said." Chen Ong said coldly, "And if you don't sleep now, you will faint on the way to the investigation. I won't delay. Once I get off the plane, I'll head straight to Cairo to investigate. If you start resting now, there's still—" Chen Ong raised his wrist and looked at his watch. "There's still 3 hours. I'm not sleepy," Strange said excitedly. "I once performed operations for 3 days and 3 nights in a row, and only rested for 2 hours before flying to London for a meeting. This bit of fatigue is a piece of cake for me. But at that time, you must not have learned spells, and you did not summon your parallel universe self." Chen Ong glanced at him. Strange appeared a little surprised that Chen Ong had guessed correctly, but he continued, "And you actually looked down on your parallel world self? That's what surprised me the most. You let your future self pull the retractor last night." Chen Ang's entire body emanated an air of "I despise you," as he said to Strange. "Just like what I asked you to do before? Tell me, why do you look down on yourself?" Strange was about to explode from Chen Ang's provocation. As soon as he opened his mouth, Chen Ong interrupted him. "Wait, let me think first. Is it because you learned my spells and applied them to surgery? You learned the spell system from Kamartaj, so you used the spirit state to avoid the loss of surgical field of vision. Then what? Using the time gem to heal the wound? The time state of the retrogressive fungus? And then removing the retrogressive fungus just now? I thought you would be able to do better without gems." Chen Ong said lightly. "Have you checked which parallel universe you could complete all the operations in one night without using the eye of a go motor?" Seeing that Strange did not answer, Chen Ong continued to mock him. "Fortunately, at least you did not copy your own ideas. Otherwise, a person without his own ideas is really sad. Do you know what I was thinking when you said, we have to continue these operations for at least 3 days? Chen Ong asked as he leaned against the cabin and looked down at Strange. Strange clenched his teeth and squeezed out a word. "What?" "I'm thinking." Chen Ong snorted a disdainful syllable. Strange felt that he had suffered the greatest humiliation of his life. His face was red, and his eyes were bloodshot because of exhaustion and anger. He stared at Chenong with bloodshot eyes. Chenong, on the other hand, was still calm. With the attitude of an examiner, he took out a book and opened it to read while he asked, "So, these 13 surgeries have passed. Do you have anything to add to the standard surgical procedure that I created?" Strange felt as if he had been shot by an arrow. He recalled the surgical procedure that Chenong had formulated. Because it was so perfect that it could not be changed, his face turned pale again. His anger was immediately extinguished. His face turned dejected. He gritted his teeth and said, "I have nothing to add." Chenong snorted. At least he was not so contemptuous. Then he turned to the next page and praised, "Not bad. At least you didn't arrogantly change my standards. You can understand the indispensability of the seemingly insignificant details in my standards. This proves that you at least understand my standards, and you're not just giving out opinions carelessly because you don't understand it. If that's the case, then I'm really disappointed." Chenong raised his watch again and glanced at it. Using magic consumes a lot of energy. You better take a break on the plane. Otherwise, you might die in the hands of some wizard when we arrive in Cairo. If the new supreme wizard dies in a corner of the Black Continent, then it'll really be a laughing stock. Strange, originally high morale after proving himself, was hit hard by Chenong. He did not want to say anything more, so he touched the eye of Agamotto on his chest, and the green ring of time appeared in his right hand. He adjusted his time to double, and was ready to lie down and sleep for a while. Before sleeping, Chenong said casually, "You'd better not use that thing. Wandering outside the time of this universe will gradually make you lose the protection of the universe and attract the attention of some existences outside the universe. They are waiting for an opportunity, ready to pull you out of time at any time. In this universe, only within the timeline is safe. There are countless dangers hidden in the endless parallel worlds. When those universes fall, you'd better make sure you don't get dragged down with them." Chapter 1047. Cairo, one of the oldest cities in human history, had a history of 5,000 years. This was longer than the civilization history of most races in the world. The regular flooding of the Nile River created the ancient civilization of ancient Egypt and also shaped the ancient city by the Nile River. The unique dry climate preserved the ancient ruins of the city. The messy roads and buildings in the city stood together with the pyramids outside the city. The old Egyptians had gone extinct, and the new masters of this ancient land were the Alamites, who held the Quran and prayed with their butts up. The Egyptian gods and the pyramids had become history. The culture of this city was broken. This ancient civilization and history had nothing to do with its new owner. Not every civilization was like the Chinese civilization, flourishing and passing on endlessly. Egypt outside the pyramid area was noisy, dirty, and backward. It was like a huge, chaotic, and disorderly construction site, with unfinished buildings everywhere. People here firmly believed that the continuous reproduction and prosperity of the family would constantly put forward new requirements for the family's living space, and Egypt's unique laws prevented most Egyptians from sealing the roof of their houses. They would add one or more floors after the next generation was born. In Egypt, building a house was always in the present tense. But it was such a Cairo that all the rich people in Africa wanted to settle down. The rich settled in the city of Nablus next to the airport, and the poor, these dilapidated, unfinished buildings with questionable construction quality and design, were not the places where the poorest people in Egypt lived. The real poor could only live in the city of the dead, a place comparable to the Brazilian slums and Mumbai slums. This was the dirtiest and worst area in Egypt, a forbidden place, a shadow under the sun in Cairo, a microcosm of the darkest and most chaotic side of the city. The city of the dead was not an exaggeration, but a real city that belonged to the dead. This was the cemetery of Cairo. Although modern Egyptians were Arabs, they were inevitably influenced by ancient Egyptian religion. Like the ancient Egyptians and the Chinese during the Western Han Dynasty, they had a tradition of treating the dead as if they were alive. They believed that the dead lived underground as if they were alive. That was why the ancient Egyptians created the pyramids. During the Han Dynasty, the Chinese buried all their daily necessities with them and built huge mausoleums. Modern Egyptians buried the dead in underground tombs, but built magnificent buildings above the tombs that looked like residences for the living. Wealthy families would hire gravekeepers to live in these buildings and keep watch for the dead, another custom very similar to that of ancient China. But no family would be prosperous forever, so uninvited vagrants would live in these buildings and mix with the gravekeepers. This was Carlo's City of the Dead. Strange stared at the mausoleum where the living and the dead lived together. Chenong asked him, "You've never been here before?" Strange shook his head. "I've attended an academic conference in Cairo before, but stayed in a magnificent hotel," Chenong asked in return. "In fact, even tourists won't come here. Although this is the real specialty of Cairo, it is more representative of culture than the pyramids. Think about it. A modern pyramid where the living and the dead live together. A mixture of religion and traditional culture, a chronic disease of the modern city and a shadow under the bright light of the country. But just like how the slums are also a specialty of Rio, tourists would rather dance samba than set foot in them. After all, the gangs are not particular. This is also the abandoned part of the city. The rulers of the slums are the gangs," Strange said solemnly. "Then who is the ruler of this place? An even more dangerous existence." Chenong sighed. "Even the gangs are not willing to live in such an unlucky place. Apart from those who have nothing, who would want to live with the dead. The voodoo cult sees this place as filthy. Only the lunatics of the voodoo cult and the shamans are happy to live here. The voodoo cult has great influence in Africa. Even Egypt, a free country, has been infiltrated by the voodoo cult. This is the paradise of the voodoo cult. They believe that living on the edge of life and death allows them to communicate with the souls of the dead, making their magic even stronger. Moreover, there are rich treasures buried underground here." "You mean they also rob tombs?" Strange was surprised. "What else? Why would the rich hire tomb keepers?" Chenong explained. "The Kamartaj knowledge is too old. Although there are very detailed records of magic and occult knowledge, they will not tell you that in modern Egypt, a new city of the dead that is quietly developed, there will not be records of the voodoo cult's movements in the new century. These secret rumors are engraved in the bloodline and shadow of the city's development. Only by getting close to this place can you understand them. The tomb keepers hired by the rich, in addition to driving away the poor who have nothing, are also responsible for guarding the remains of their loved ones and funerary objects in the catacombs. And the voodoo cult happens to have their eyes on the rich resources of the corpses here, as well as the rich funerary objects that can be used as magic items and casting materials. Gold, silver utensils, buried gems, and antiques. Walking on the empty streets, there was garbage on both sides that emitted a foul smell. The streets here were the same as other poor areas, with garbage everywhere and cats and dogs wandering around. But the streets here were more narrow and messy. There were no street signs, traffic police, or security police. The maze-like streets were empty. The tombs in the City of the Dead were built according to the style of residential houses. There were courtyards, walls, gates, houses, and tombs. Most of the houses only had 1 or 2 floors, appearing low. The walls beside the gates were engraved with the name of the tomb owner and the number of the tomb. Below the tomb were the coffins and bones. The street signs were not the names of the house owners and the house numbers, but the names of the tomb owners and the number of the tomb. There were about 1 million Egyptians living in the City of the Dead. Chenong stopped in front of a relatively luxurious tomb. The gaze that had been peeping at them from behind suddenly disappeared without a trace. The voodoo cult was a big shot here. Those who came looking for them, regardless of whether they were unlucky or not, were not people that these lowly gangs of the City of the Dead could disturb. Strange looked at the tomb in front of him and hesitated for a moment before saying, "I'll wait for you outside." "So you don't want to go in?" Chenong smiled faintly. "Then guard the door. Don't let him run away." Chenong knocked on the door, and a voice with a West African tribal accent asked vigilantly in English, "Who is it?" "Master, someone introduced me to buy something from you," Chenong said in a low voice. The person inside was silent for a moment before they heard the sound of someone dawdling. The chair dragged on the ground, making a loud sound. The person moved closer to the door and said in a low voice, "Who introduced you here?" Chenong's hand went through the middle of the wooden door. He punched through about 3 centimeters of the thick wooden door and grabbed the man's collar. He pulled the man's head over and pressed it heavily against the door. Chenong whispered into the man's ear, "Death introduced us here. If you don't want to die, you'd better be a good boy and open the door. My gun is stuck to the door where your head is. If you want the bullet to go through the wooden door and through your head, 10, 9, 8, 7, I'll open it. I'll open it." The person panicked. "Don't shoot." Strange heard the door open with a click. He endured the discomfort and moved closer. He saw Chenong let go of the person's collar and slammed the door open. A skinny black man with all kinds of voodoo magic materials, bones, and magic tools taken from corpses fell to the ground and looked at the door in fear. Chenong walked in with a cold face and told Strange, "Come in and close the door." Strange could only obey the order. He walked in reluctantly and closed the door. The tomb was very dark under his feet, and the only light source was the hole that Chenong had pierced through the door. Chenong found a place and sat down, facing the voodoo wizard's face. He asked, 3 months ago, did someone ask you for help?" The wizard was very frightened, but his eyes still moved slightly, as if he was looking for his gun. He said, "Sir, there are many people who ask me for help every month. I don't know who it was." Chapter 1048. Chenong looked at the voodoo wizard's panicked eyes. The room was very gloomy, and there were traces of voodoo witchcraft everywhere. There were the dried and decayed remains of eagles, snakes, and lizards, animal corpses, human bones, monkey heads, antelope skulls, elephant tails, bracelets on the wall, and all kinds of bottles and jars on the table. Chenong walked past the table and saw a dried chameleon, a woman's finger with very long nails, a vulture's head, bundles of antelope horns and ivory, brightly colored local textiles, and bundled up dead people's hair. Chenong walked to a shelf that was used for blood sacrifice. On the shelf, there were necklaces made of beast teeth, bone ashes, and other colorful powders that were used to cover the body, luxurious priest clothes, and decorative magic tools, as well as small hammers that were used to smash skulls, large hammers that were used to smash bones, daggers that were used to cut open chests, large blades that were used to behead people, and spears that were used to stab the sacrificial offerings. Chenong took down the spear and held it in his hand. The wizard on the other side was sobbing and begging in a low voice, "Let me go. I don't know anything." Chenong suddenly turned around, and the spear in his hand shot out like lightning, piercing through the wizard's chest. Strange, who was guarding the wizard, was shocked and said in horror, "You killed him? Why did you kill him? We haven't gotten anything out of him yet. Are you crazy?" Chenong walked forward, stepped on the spear, and pushed the spear that had pierced through his chest forward. More than half of the spear pierced through his chest and pressed against the ground, forming a frame to prop him up. The wizard hanging on the spear bled from all 7 orifices and died a horrible death. Strange was at a loss and had no idea what Chenong was doing. No matter how we interrogate him, he won't say anything. Chenong said calmly, "After all, we can't hurt him." The wizard who was impaled on the spear was still motionless. His limbs were twisted, and he died a horrible death. Chenong grabbed a handful of butterfly scale powder from the jar on the table and sprinkled it on the corpse. He then opened 5 or 6 boxes of witchcraft materials and grabbed a lot of powders of various colors. There was lime, clay, red earth, blood mixed with spices, and even a small bit of gold powder. Chenong looked at the gold and silver powder in his hand and said with interest, "It seems that staying in Egypt for so long was not a waste of time." Gold, silver, and gems symbolize the gods of ancient Egypt and are also the origin of European alchemy. Gold is the sun, and men are the power of life. Silver is the moon, and women are the power of spirit. This is the magic system of ancient Egypt. It's convenient for me. Chenong dipped the powder in the wizard's blood and drew all kinds of mysterious symbols and geometric patterns around it. Strange looked at him solemnly and asked, "Are you trying to summon his soul back for interrogation?" "No." Chenong quickly finished the runes, stood up, and looked at the corpse. "Do you know the meaning of the word voodoo?" The word comes from Benin. Benin is one of the most backward countries in Africa, and it is also the origin of voodoo. The true meaning of voodoo was created by the voodoo Queen Lavelle in the 18th century, but Benin is the cradle of voodoo. It originated from the ancient beliefs of the local natives. In the local language, voodoo means God, spirit, and soul. Very few people know the ancient origin of voodoo. Even before humans left Africa, it was passed down in an ancient tribe. Long before the Egyptians built the pyramids and developed their own sacrificial culture, the predecessor of voodoo had already been passed down in Africa. Legend has it that its origin is on the African continent, one of the 5 tribes that hold the secret of the origin of mankind. The name of that ancient tribe can no longer be verified, but the god that they worship, or rather fear, has been passed down. Voodoo is the description of the nature of that god and the inheritance of its power. In the worldview of voodoo, everything has a spirit, and spirituality originates from the outflow of an indescribable God. The spirit flows from the source of God, and with death, it returns to the body of God. They worship the soul, study the soul, and try to use the power of magic. They refuse the process of returning and refuse death. What makes you think that you can control the soul of a voodoo wizard? They struggle their whole lives to escape from that curse, the gaze of that existence. They kill spiritual animals and use those spiritual materials to create substitutes, try to confuse that existence and replace their own death. Chenong looked at the spear under his feet and smiled. Spears can't kill them. The corpse hanging on the spear suddenly raised his head, and an extremely distorted expression appeared on his bloody face. He used his broken lungs to make a strange sound. "Since you know that knives and swords can't kill us, why do you still dare to come here?" Chenong kicked his body heavily, sending him flying. Then he lifted the spear and nailed him to the wall. He sneered, "Even if I can't kill you, so what? Aren't you still a trash? There are many people who can't be killed. Have you heard of demi-humans? They wish they could die. Do you want to be wrapped in 100 tons of cement and sink into the Maradona Trench? Trash." The wizard on the wall, in front of Chun-Ang's wild, domineering aura, still revealed his true nature. Seeing that he still chose to pretend to be dead, even though he didn't receive any fatal damage, instead of fighting back, it was clear that this guy regarded immortality as his trump card. A little scared, and he revealed his true nature. He hurriedly begged for mercy. "Warrior, we can talk. You can ask whatever you want. It's not that we voodoo wizards have never been dealt with in this way. They cut off our heads or burned our bodies to ashes with fire. But these methods have long been solved by our wizards. You can't kill me, but that person can kill me. He can destroy my soul. I don't dare to offend him." The wizard begged. "How about I tell you some clues? I won't offend him too much. You can investigate it yourself." Chenong glanced at him. He really couldn't stand the rancid smell in this room. He asked Strange to open the door. Strange simply stood at the door with Chun-Ang's back facing him. Facing the voodoo wizard nailed to the wall, Strange said leisurely, "Playing with souls? Is it a devil or a demon? Satan or Lucifer? Mephitis? Baal? Belial? Ammon? It shouldn't be Satan." Chenong said softly, "It seems that Satan has taken the blame for you guys. I hope he won't be messed up too badly by the investigation team of the Revolutionary Alliance. Which devil or demon king became the ally of Thanos?" Chun-Ong played with the lighter in his hand. The wizard on the wall showed a flattering smile and said, "The monster I summoned should be heading to Wakanda. The reason why they found me was because I had sneaked into Wakanda before." Strange said solemnly, "Why can you sneak into Wakanda? And why did you sneak there?" The wizard showed a greedy smile. "Of course I went there for vibranium. If not, who would go to that remote place?" Chenong sneered mockingly. The voodoo wizard trembled and said cautiously, Wakanda seems to have a mysterious connection with voodoo. People of voodoo sometimes go there to exchange some things, provide them with information. Once, the people of Wakanda came to our church in Fudu, hoping that we could provide them with some clues about the slave hunters who kidnapped slaves. I took the opportunity to sneak in, but before I could find vibranium, I was caught. Chun Ong added calmly. Wakanda is one of the other 4 ancient tribes that hold the secret of human origins. It's normal for them to have connections with voodoo. I think he knows who is working with Thanos. Strange tilted his head and looked at the wizard. How can we get what we want from him? I can see it now. His soul isn't in his body. His body is just a puppet. Didn't you notice what's missing from his body? Chenong said. His voodoo doll is not on him. In fact, he hid his soul in the doll, and then refined his body into a resurrected corpse. Even if he was fatally injured, even if we cut off his head, he would not be able to escape. He won't be hurt. Chun Ong grabbed the tail of the spear and shook it down. The spear trembled on the wizard's chest and rubbed against his ribs, making a cracking sound. Then why is he so afraid that you will destroy his body? Strange asked curiously. He hid the voodoo doll too well. He's afraid that someone won't find it. Chun Ong said disdainfully. After his soul is attached to the voodoo doll, he loses the ability to move and relies on controlling the resurrected corpse to move. If we destroy the resurrected corpse, he will be imprisoned in the doll and wait for someone to find him. Only when someone rediscovers him can he manipulate others to carry out all kinds of evil rituals, seize a new body, or refine a new resurrected corpse. So in Benin and Haiti, the locals are often afraid of old voodoo dolls hidden in remote places, thinking that they are cursed by wizards. The local wizards can't erase this fear and long-past experience, so they threaten them that when they find the voodoo doll, they are cursed. Only by luring others to take it can the curse be dispelled. Curious tourists often suffer because of this. I investigated the case of a tourist who bought a voodoo doll attached to a wizard's soul as a tourist souvenir out of curiosity. His family was killed. So, Shannon concluded, every wizard is worried about how to hide their voodoo doll. If it's too obvious, it will be destroyed by the enemy. If it's too well hidden, if no one finds it for thousands of years, it's over. Chunong looked at the wizard hanging on the wall with a faint smile. This one belongs to the category of hiding it too well, so he's afraid that we will destroy his body. But he keeps his bottom line, because if he betrays that person, even his soul will not survive, right? Strange sighed. It seems that we won't get anything more. Let him explain a little more and exchange his body back. Hearing this, the wizard's eyes showed a look of excitement. But Chenong sneered and dispelled his excitement. I'm sorry, I haven't lost to you in terms of cruelty and ruthlessness. He's afraid of the person who forced him, but he should be more afraid of me. Chun Ang's voice came coldly from the darkness, his face hidden in the darkness, extremely gloomy. Chun Ong leaned in front of Wizard Voodoo and whispered, It seems that you still can't feel true fear, which is why you fear that person more than me. The wizard was so scared that he almost peed his pants. You're already scary enough, and few humans are scarier than you. As a human, why are you competing with demons? Are you proud because you've won? He shouted crazily. What are you doing? If you destroy my body, I won't tell you anything. Chunong threw the heads of the crocodile, eagle, wild dog, goat, and orangutan at his feet, took out the corpse oil, mixed it with high alcohol, and slowly poured it over the wizard's head. He then used blood to draw a complicated magic circle on the wall behind him. The wizard's soul frantically sent out warnings, and he was so scared that tears streamed down his face. He begged, Please, I really can't say his name. If I say it, my soul will be taken away by him. I signed a contract. He finally wailed, Please, I signed a contract. Don't destroy my soul. Are you going to use hellfire? Chenang's face relaxed. It's a demon. Very good. We know something else. And we know why that existence let him go. Because of the nature of a demon, he hopes that our actions will lead to nothing, and instead let him harvest a superior soul. Strange added, You're too cowardly. Chen Ong whispered in the wizard's ear. When I saw that you chose to attach your soul to the voodoo doll, I knew that you're a coward. The real voodoo wizards who are not afraid of death will only make substitute dolls and then transfer their own injuries to the substitute. Those kind of wizards will pick up a knife and fight with others. You're just a coward who only wants to fake your death. No wonder that existence thinks that it can take away your soul. Chenong paused for a moment, then continued to pour alcohol on the wizard's head. The wizard struggled wildly, trying to pull the spear out of his chest. However, Chun-Ong quickly nailed the wizard's palms with 2 sacrificial daggers, and then nailed the wizard's feet with a dagger. The wizard slumped against the wall, like a crucified Christ. Strange frowned. Why did you put him like this? Do you want the church to kill him? This is the image of the Son of Christ. He's not worthy of this. I don't have that bastard, Chenong said coldly. There's no such thing as worthy or not. He's the one I nailed himself. He deserves this glory. The wizard on the wall did not feel the supreme glory. He only felt the deep fear of death. Chun-Ong lit a lighter and threw it on the Son of Christ. A raging fire ignited on the body of the Son of Christ. In the blue flame, Chun-Ong chanted a spell. The wings of an eagle, the fins of a crocodile, the sense of smell of a wild dog, the hands and wisdom of an orangutan, the sacrifice of a goat to the unnameable. Guide them to what I'm looking for. Strange could not bear to watch. He turned his head to avoid looking at the wizard's earth-shattering screams and struggles. But the flame only lit up for 3 seconds before it was extinguished. After a while, the wizard also stopped screaming and said excitedly, I'm fine. Huh, I'm fine. Strange turned his head and noticed that the skulls in the center of the magic circle under his feet had disappeared, and after that, something that did not belong to this place reappeared. It was a simple doll made of hair, painted with blood, carved with bones taken out of the body, and carved with witchcraft spells. Strange looked at the voodoo wizard with sympathy, and mourned for him for 3 seconds in his heart, which was rare. A few minutes later, the voodoo wizard, whose face was as pale as ash, spilled everything out like beans from a bamboo tube. His contract was replaced by a fresh soul of a dead person by Chun-Ong. Strange looked at the soul that was taken away by an unknown force in the void behind him, and finally began to think seriously. What was the power of Chun-Ong? Which school of sorcerer did he belong to? How far did he have to learn magic to be able to change the devil's contract? Strange could not figure it out. He had a sincere fear. Chapter 1049. To the south of Cairo, the scenery around him became more and more desolate. In addition to a few tourist cities, the whole of Egypt was large tracts of farmland. Cities were scattered along both sides of the Nile River. The pedestrians around him gradually lost their shrewdness, revealing a sense of embarrassment and dullness. In fact, it was like Egypt in the late 1960s. If you open your eyes to the whole world, you'll find that in this world, most countries are still in the late stage of agricultural countries. Except for a few economically developed areas in Western Europe, North America, East Asia, and Australia, most other countries and regions are still in an agricultural society. Even Egypt, the strongest country in Africa, except for a few industrial tourist cities, other places are like in the 1960s. It seems that time here has never moved forward after 1960. After the UPA made a breakthrough in industrial, energy, and artificial intelligence revolution and became a national alliance that can travel across galaxies, this geographical division became more and more obvious. On this planet, the 3 allied countries of the UPA have entered the interstellar era and as a whole have entered a communist society, which is the first world. Countries such as the United States and Australia are still economically prosperous, and industry supports the backbone of the entire society. They have entered the late stage of capitalism, which is the second world. In countries such as India, Southeast Asia, and Egypt, some areas have entered the early stage of capitalism. In urbanized areas such as Mumbai, people are still living in an industrialized society, which is the third world. But in the countryside outside the cities, time seems to have stopped there. The Nazis also did well in South America. Originally, after the establishment of the UPA, economic globalization went bankrupt and South America fell into a period of huge recession. almost into the Fourth World. But after the Nazis occupied South America, with the technological strength of Hydra and the seriousness of the Nazis, they actually carried out a wave of industrialization, forcibly extending the life of South America. And now they're doing better than India. But in the African continent, outside of Egypt, the places with cities may be called the Fourth World. There is water, electricity, and some primary industrial products. Apart from that, industry has nothing to do with them. After the establishment of the UPA, the division of the whole world, and the bankruptcy of globalization since World War II, all these countries returned to their original state. In a vast land outside these cities, human activities almost declined to the Iron Age. Except for iron, there are few means of production related to industry. This place used to be rich in resources and was a battleground for many countries. The African people often criticized developed countries such as China, Europe, and the United States for plundering their resources. However, after the establishment of the People's Revolutionary Alliance and entering the interstellar era, the asteroid belt and extraterrestrial planets had a lot of resources that did not cost money. Only then did the African people realize that what was worse than being plundered was not even having the right to be plundered. The capitalists did not come here to do charity. Along the way, the mines were abandoned, the factories closed down, and the roads were no longer maintained. The further they got from Cairo, it was as if they were gradually walking out of a civilized society. The black people by the roadside looked numb, and the road under the car was in tatters. Globalization failed, and the world was divided. Just 3 years later, this place was beaten back to its original state, almost returning to the state of primitive tribes. Strange watched these changes and said with sorrow, "When China needs this place, it will build roads, high-rise buildings, mines and factories here, but once it no longer needs this place, it will be destroyed. Just throw it away like a pair of shoes." The Earth is full of dangers in the universe, and the People's Revolutionary Alliance can't even protect itself. How can it come here to save the world and save the black people? Shenong said with a smile. The People's Revolutionary Alliance closed its country and closed its relations with other countries, which is too harmful to the world's economic development. It is almost equivalent to the whole of Europe, half of Central Asia, and the whole of East Asia, a wide area across Asia and Europe, closed and independent, accounting for 2/3 of the world's industrialized countries. The closure of such a large market and source of investment has a fatal impact on these countries that have always been the division of labor in the world market. So the new president of the United States did not save the world after coming to power. Chunong looked at Strange with a faint smile and said, "Instead, they pulled in India, Southeast Asia, Australia, and Canada, formed their own small economic circle, returned to industrialization, and gave up other regions. The separation of the Third and Fourth Worlds is the result of the joint action of the People's Revolutionary Alliance and the Pacific and Indian Ocean's economic alliances of the United States. The Earth is being divided into 4 dimensions, and the whole world is like the Earth in 4 different dimensions. The closure of the People's Revolutionary Alliance is due to the gap between the old and the new human origins, and the United States is closed because it is independent. The entire human society on the Earth is like 4 parallel Earths divided into 4. One world cultivates the universe, roams the sea of stars, and absorbs tens of millions of resource planets to support the development of civilization. It makes a name for itself in the Milky Way and is naturally another rising interstellar civilization. The other world is industrialized, and although the economy is impacted, it is generally developing well. In the face of the collapse of globalization, it is more than enough to protect itself and gradually gives up global hegemony. First, it retreats for domestic industry to develop again, and second, it advances the People's Revolutionary Alliance to expand outside the planet. Other countries can also enjoy the international order established by the United States by latching onto its thigh. If not for the deterrence of the People's Revolutionary Alliance in the front and the hostility of the Nazis in the back, it can still be said to be peaceful. The Third World, under the wave of global economic isolation, can only protect itself. Countries like Egypt and the Middle East can still latch onto the thigh of the United States, sell their resources, and keep the main cities from declining. South Africa is miserable, falling into the abyss. They are like isolated islands and reefs that emerge after being submerged by the waves. Even the duality of the entire country, cities and villages are separated. The Fourth World has been almost forgotten outside of civilized society and has become a primitive and closed tribe. It can almost be said to have regressed back to the feudal society. The entire world, under the wave of global economic isolation, although still connected in space, has been divided into several completely different worlds in economy and society. This is the Earth in the post-industrial era. This is the change in the world after the year of arrival. All the way to North Sudan, there were fewer and fewer vehicles on the road. Some abandoned cars were parked on the side of the road, and the iron sheet on the car body had been peeled off by the hard-working African people, leaving only an abandoned, messy body rusting by the side of the road. Then there was a fallen tree blocking their way. Strange got out of the car and looked at the trunk that had obviously fallen for a few days and exclaimed, "Oh my God, are there no cars here? There are obstacles on the road, and no one has dealt with it for a few days? There are no cars here." The Black Wizard said indifferently as he sat in the car. Strange was puzzled. Am I on an alien planet? I don't believe that no one in Africa can buy a car. What's the use of buying a car if you can't buy oil? If you can buy oil, is it just for a few people to drive and maintain a road? The wizard rolled his eyes and said, "The white man has left. The businessmen have left. They have abandoned the factories and shops here, leaving only the black people. What's the use of the road?" Strange was shocked. "But you are an oil-producing country. You can refine the oil yourself. The engineers have left. The investors have left. If we can't buy the machinery, we can't sell the oil. What's the use of the oil refinery? Stark has invented a new energy source, and now the oil price is so low that only the Middle East can sell it. Africa has long stopped producing oil." The wizard spread out his hands. "We have to move this thing away." Strange complained. "Oh my God, we should have asked SHIELD to send us to Wakanda. Why do we have to drive there? If SHIELD sends us there, then there's no real Wakanda. Only one of the poorest countries in Africa, Wakanda. And your suspending ring can't teleport you there. There's a space surveillance system there. I don't want to be chased like a dog as soon as I get there." Chinong also got out of the car and looked at the big tree blocking the road. He took out the voodoo doll and threw it to Strange. The wizard in the car looked nervous, afraid that the doll would fall to the ground. Strange reached out and caught the voodoo doll. The wizard in the car seemed to have hit a wall of air. Strange reached out and touched the voodoo doll, then grabbed the doll's hands and feet like a little girl playing house, manipulating the doll to open the door and get out of the car. His movements were quite rough. Obviously, playing with dolls like a little girl was not Strange's hobby. The wizard's body seemed to be controlled and moved involuntarily. He stood up with a big movement and hit his head hard. He had to open his mouth and complain, "Be gentle, man. You're controlling me, not playing with a doll." Strange's face darkened. He controlled the wizard's body to lift the big tree and throw the obstacle to the side. "You should find a way to develop a spell to control the doll," Chinong said sarcastically. "Otherwise, this resurrected corpse will be completely wasted. You can let him move on his own." Strange complained. "His soul-attached doll is in your hands, so it will definitely listen to you. Resurrected corpses can only be of greatest value under the control of a wizard." Chinong took the voodoo doll from him and twisted it twice. The wizard's body made a series of movements that were absolutely impossible for a human body to do. Chinong grabbed the voodoo doll's forearm and lifted it up. The wizard in front of him soared into the sky and flew into the air, making the classic gesture of Superman. "Look, is this something he can do by himself?" Chinong threw the doll back into Strange's hands. The wizard in the sky flew into the distance, or rather, was thrown. His body seemed to be thrown back by an invisible force and then smashed to the ground. The wizard's face maintained a desperate expression. Chapter 10:50. Amidst the African wilderness stood a modern city. This was Bonanzana, the largest city in Wakanda and the political center of the country. It was also the capital of Wakanda. This was a city with a unique style. It had high-tech skyscrapers and modern equipment, but it lacked the soul of a modern city. This was a hidden and isolated city. The people lived in the magnificent buildings created by vibranium while being isolated from the outside world. There were no cars on the streets, and there were no high-end financial and business districts in the center of the city. It was like a young soul hidden in a tall shell. Under the modern buildings was actually the social structure and soul of a small African town. Under the appearance of a city was the core of a small town. Modern cities could not be built with high-tech and wealth alone. Bonanzana lacked the most important component of a big city, population. Without enough population and refusing to open to the outside world, this city lost the unique social structure of a modern city. Rather than saying that Bonanzana was a high-tech city isolated from the outside world, it was better to say that Wakanda was a tribal country living in a modern city. This was in line with the outside world's impression. Recently, the spies that Wakanda secretly sent to the outside world are losing contact with us. The captain of Wakanda's royal guards, the female General Oki, reported to the 4 tribal leaders and King T'Challa. We suspect that the regicide, Ulysses Crow, is getting rid of them. He's removing our eyes and ears. A tribal elder with a dangling lower lip said, Crow is Wakanda's greatest enemy. He was once a shameless thief. He stole Wakanda's vibranium and detonated a bomb in a border tribe. He blew up my parents. The tribal leader at the border said through gritted teeth. T'Challa also clenched his fists, one hand pressing on his fist. It was the old queen. His mother was looking at him. The queen comforted her son and stood up. 3 years ago, Ulysses Crow was involved in a battle between that existence and others. His body was modified, and he was injected with vibranium, gaining great power. My husband, your king, the last Black Panther, was killed by Crow when he was hunting him down. Crow took away the Black Panther's armor and sent me my husband's head. He's humiliating Wakanda, humiliating the Panther goddess, humiliating all of us. He's taking revenge on us for everything we've done to him. Vibranium has already fused with Crow's cells. Princess Su Rue, T'Challa's sister, projected a transparent human body. She zoomed in on the cells and gestured. His idea of modification is very advanced. I never thought that vibranium could fuse perfectly with the human body to such an extent. And the most terrifying thing about Crow is the way he uses the energy of vibranium. Under high-frequency vibrations, vibranium exhibits extraordinary physical characteristics. Crow used the characteristics of this vibranium to build a very complicated vibration model. He used the vibrations of vibranium in his body to store a huge amount of energy. Any attack against him would be converted into energy and stored in his body. Once he's released, an image appeared in the projection, a rather fat Black Panther. Forgive the old king. Although he was a vigorous warrior when he was young, his slacking after becoming king caused him to inevitably gain weight. So, a Black Panther with a bulging belly. To be honest, he looked a little like a black tiger, the kind of fat tiger. Although the tribal elders did not laugh out of respect for the king, they all had the same thought in their hearts. No wonder the old king lost to Crow. Just by looking at his physique, it was obvious that the old king had lost the will to fight as a warrior. Fat tiger. Black Panther pounced to Crow. He was wearing the Black Panther armor and had consumed heart-shaped herbs. The battle techniques of his youth were still in his bones. Like a real Black Panther, he pounced at Crow. His vibranium claws were indestructible, but his entire body was covered in silver. His body was as tough as a god or a demon under high-intensity training. His entire body was muscular. Topless, he faced the old Black Panther head-on. With just a lift of his hand, a powerful shockwave swept out. Tens of millions of high-frequency vibrations carried enormous energy that swept over. The royal guards beside the old Black Panther were easily shattered like porcelain. The vibranium spears in their hands were the first to resonate, carrying a powerful force that instantly shattered their arms. In the violent vibrations, their skin and bones separated from each other. The vibrations traveled along their bones and spread up their arms. Their internal organs were violently shaking, and the intense displacement of their skulls caused their brains to violently slam against their skulls. In just a few breaths of time, the brains of these female guards had turned into mush. Female General Oki did her best to suppress her grief and hatred. Her hateful eyes stared at Crow on the screen. The old Black Panther was sent flying with almost no resistance. The vibranium armor on his body did not provide any protection at all. Instead, it became a talisman that hastened his death. When Crow walked up to the old Black Panther, he was still struggling on the ground. However, his muscles and bones had been shattered, and he could not even get up. T'Challa could not tell how many times he had watched this video. His eyes were already red. The temperature in the hall had dropped by a few degrees. Whoa, whoa, whoa. On the screen, Crow stepped on the head of the old Black Panther, who was vomiting blood. He laughed. Isn't this our king T'Challa? The old Black Panther is also called T'Challa. Back then, you were the one who personally ordered them to imprint this on me. Crow subconsciously tilted his head, but his neck was smooth. I forgot that after I trained that thing to the 3rd stage, my body was reborn. The thing you imprinted on me was gone. Crow said regretfully. Otherwise, I really would have let you take a good look at that thing. Vibranium, the most precious metal in the world. This thing is infinitely powerful. Crow said to the old king. Do you see it? It was that little bit that I stole, a little bit that is insignificant to you, that gave me the power I have today. What a treasure. He fused a little bit of it into my body, and I became what I am now. You primitive people, stupid monkeys, do not deserve such a great metal. You do not deserve to use it. In your hands, it is such a broken thing. Crow roared. The vibration of his voice caused the vibranium to lose its activity. The old king's battle suit quickly fell off. Crow picked it up like a rag and held it in his hand. The young King T'Challa looked at his father's face. Tears blurred his vision for the umpteenth time. I need vibranium. Crow stepped on the old king's head and said, that existence gave me an order. If I can't perfect what he gave me, from the unique properties of vibranium, vibration physics, acoustics, and structural mechanics, the properties of superconductive metals, and the 12 types of energy release states of metallization of the human body, this damn long and stinky name. If I can't figure out something from it, he will use the vibration of the universe's background to transmit a little of his power. And I will. Bang! Crow shouted exaggeratedly and made an explosive gesture with both hands. He said, explode into minced meat or vibranium. The one who collects my corpse is blessed. So, I need some vibranium to experiment. But I thought, since I'm going to do it, why not do it big? You stupid monkeys, the Black Devils have been hogging those treasures for too long. It's time for someone else to take over. Crow said as he put the Black Panther's mask on his head. He said, what do you think of the name King of Wakanda? Ulysses Crow. The old Black Panther struggled, his lips opening and closing several times. Crow grabbed the camera, lowered his head, and said, what did you say? Louder. The old Black Panther said with difficulty, you won't succeed. My son, the new king. He will avenge me. He will protect our country and destroy your ambitions. I will watch him complete all of this. Crow nodded and smiled. Now I'm at the 3rd stage. When I finish the 4th stage, I will destroy your country with my own hands. Then I will rebuild, my country. I need the resources there to complete that damn experiment. The projection was extinguished here. General Oki said to all the tribal elders, this is his announcement. Now, I think he's here. We need to mobilize the army, use all of our power to kill him. The River Tribe elders said, he's only one person. He can't deal with all of us. His power can control vibranium. The Mining Tribe elders said, and all of our weapons contain vibranium. We should make or buy some weapons without vibranium from the outside. Train our warriors to use them. Weapons from the outside are useless too. Princess Su Rue interrupted them. I've studied the ability that Ulysses Crow displayed in this video. He can make vibranium conduct vibrations. He can magnify the power of vibrations by 1,000,000 times. The vibration model in his body does not control vibranium resonance, but the resonance of all matter. He was able to transmit his vibrational power to all matter. Even if our warriors use weapons made of other materials, they will be easily destroyed by him. Then you're saying that we can't fight him? The elder said angrily. I'm saying that we need to upgrade our technology. Princess Surue wanted to explain, but her mother interrupted her. Surue, T'Chara also changed the topic. I need a new suit that can fight against Crow. Sister, how's your development going? Princess Surue tapped on the Chimayu bead in her hand, and a stream of liquid vibranium bound by high-energy electricity appeared in the projection. The modification that Crow received, allowing vibranium to fuse with his body cells, the technological content has already surpassed Wakanda's. This may be alien technology. To fight him, we must also develop a technology that allows vibranium to fuse with the body. But the time is too short. I only found a way to fuse vibranium with simpler body tissues like muscles, bones, and skin. Other lymphocytes, nerve cells, brain cells, stem cells, and internal organs cannot fuse with vibranium. So the newly developed suit can only fuse with your muscles, bones, and skin. That's enough. T'Chara comforted her. You've done well. To be able to complete the development of a new generation of suit in such a short time is beyond my expectations. You're the best. I believe that if my sister is given enough time, it's not impossible to create such technology. The internal organs and brain are protected by muscles and bones. T'Chara looked at the projected suit. How does it wear it? Inject it into your body. After the modification is completed, most of the liquid vibranium robots will shrink back into the gaps in your bones. Only when you want to activate it will it flow out and fill in between your cells, forming liquid metal cells. But I have no clue about the vibration energy model in Crow's body. The technological content is even more terrifying than fusing vibranium cells. Princess Surue shook her head. Brother, this new suit still needs to be modified. I must think of a way to make it immune to Crow's resonance in order to fight him directly. When will it be done? T'Chara asked. Princess Surue said, I'm currently building a model of vibranium particles for energy dissipation. If, looking at her brother's determined gaze, the princess said in a low voice, I will complete the modification within a month. Chapter 1051 Wudong Mountain, Mysterious Heaven Jade Palace. Outside the eastern heavenly gate, the abbot of Wudong, Taoist priest Ching Su, clasped his hands behind his back and looked down at the sea of clouds. A Taoist child came forward to report, Abbot, apprentice sister Lotus Flower has arrived. Taoist priest Ching Su laughed and said, Let her in. A moment later, a woman dressed in Taoist robes kowtowed. Greetings, master. Taoist Qingshu was gentle and had the demeanor of an elder. Seeing his only female disciple kowtowing to him, he helped her up. Lianhua, Wudong was originally a Chuanjian Taoist sect. I did not accept female disciples. The female disciples of our sect have their own Taoist tradition, and they cultivate in the Green Dawn Temple on the northern mountain. But I broke my vows and accepted you as my disciple. Do you know why? I do not know, Lianhua said respectfully. Taoist Qingshu sighed. Wudong was originally a branch of Kunlun. During the last years of the Northern Song dynasty, a descendant of Kunlun went down the mountain to support the Song dynasty. That descendant of Kunlun was a genius, and also the master of a heavenly armament. He came from the imperial army and had always wanted to serve his country. He also created his own heavenly armament, the Way of the Six Armaments. When the Jin invaded, he wrote to the emperor, wanting to use his Kunlun Taoism and the Six Armaments to resist the Jin and protect the Song dynasty. Unfortunately, the illness of the Song dynasty was too deep. Outside the city of Tokyo, the successor of the Kunlun sect, Guijing, was killed by two mysterious masters of the magic blade, Wanyan Min, who later became the master of the celestial wolf blade in the hands of Temujin. Before Guojing died, he gave his Kunlun Taoism to the six armaments, so that it could choose another master. He hoped that after the master of the six armaments received his inheritance, he would be able to drive the barbarians north and support the Song dynasty. Unfortunately, by the time the next master of the six armaments was born, the southern Song dynasty had already fallen. Lianhua exclaimed, "Then the next master of the six armaments, could it be?" Priest Qing Su slightly cupped his fist and proudly said, "That's right, the next owner of the six armor divine weapon is our Wudong founding master, the one who supported the Han dynasty, drove the Tatars to the north, assisted the Emperor of Heaven's sword master Zhu Yuanzhang to establish the Great Ming, Zhang Sanfeng, Zhang Zhenren. That year, when the Great Ming dynasty was founded, the Heavenly Emperor's sword, five Emperor's saber, heaven and earth warping six divine weapon owners were born. The majestic imperial Ming dynasty drove north to the Ming Yuan Empire, flourishing for a time. That six divine armors is the predecessor of our Wudong sect's divine artifact, Taiji. Ancestral Master Zhang lived in Shaolin when he was young. In Shaolin's ancient depository, he discovered the remains of the divine armament Liujia and obtained the Kunlun Taoist Dharma within. Only then did he break out of the sect and head down the mountain to assist Han Tong in reforging the divine armament. Later on, he taught Emperor Taizu of the Ming dynasty and was honored as Taoist Zhang. This was the reason why Mount Wudong was rebuilt during the Hongwu era, and the sect was built for the patriarch. Ancestral Master Zhang inherited the Kunlun Taoist Dharma, so he respected Kunlun as the sect leader. He imitated the Kunlun Jade Palace and built the Wudong Jade Palace. In the eyes of Kunlun, our Wudong was born from the Kunlun divine armament Liujia and was only a branch of Kunlun heading south. But in the Ming dynasty, our Wudong did not decline and flourish for a time. The world only knew of Wudong, not Kunlun. They were indignant, so the two sects gradually drifted apart. It was only during the Republic of China that things turned for the better. At that time, the Taoists were weakened and the demons were on the rise. The two sects reconciled and worked together to overthrow the Han dynasty. Now, Wudong and Kunlun are of the same breath and branch, and are in charge of Taoism together. Now that humanity is flourishing, the heavenly realm government has descended to establish the great unity world. Buddhism and Taoism are but fleeting clouds. The 1,000-year-old orthodoxy is about to come to an end. Priest Qing Su said sadly, "China doesn't need us anymore." Lianhua, "Yes, master." Lianhua quickly bowed. Priest Qing Su took out a copper box from behind him and placed it in Lianhua's hand. Lianhua's voice trembled slightly. "Master, this is... Take the Taiji sword's remains and leave China." Qing Su's voice was deep as he exhorted, "Reforge the divine armament. There are still Han people overseas. Continue our Wudong orthodoxy. Remember, Wudong's roots are in China. Don't forget your roots. Otherwise, the divine armament will abandon you and return to China. I won't be able to rest in peace even if I die." "Master?" Lianhua held the copper box and was puzzled. "Why is this necessary?" "This is a joint decision of Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. Other than the Tri-Sovereign Sword, which refuses to leave the old land, the other divine armaments and demonic blades will be taken out of the country by the weapon masters and reforged outside the country. This is to prepare for the millennium calamity and the eternal demonic calamity. Go rest." Priest Qing Su stood up and turned his back to her. Lianhua's eyes were brimming with tears. She accepted the copper box and kowtowed to Priest Qing Su 3 times. Only then did she reluctantly bid farewell. Before she left the mountain, Shi Xiang found her and asked, "Lianhua, do you have a place to stay on this trip?" Lianhua shook her head. "Lianhua has been raised on the mountain since she was a child. I have never left the mountain. This trip is boundless. I don't know where to go. I heard that the government's most wanted criminal, Fu Manzhou, Lord Man, has fled abroad." Fu Manzhou is a remnant of the Qing government during the Republic of China. After his demonic blade, the spherical heaven ring, was destroyed, he has always wanted to reforge it. Unfortunately, divine armaments and demonic blades do not recognize a second owner. He was rejected by the demonic blade and could not reforge it. So, he took in a disciple and wanted to borrow his disciple's hand to reforge the demonic blade. His disciple is said to be called Zheng Shanqi. Now, he is carrying the remains of the demonic blade to a small and poor country in the African continent. 3 years ago, the clone of the primeval demon created by the Americans wreaked havoc in North America. He passed down a peerless martial art, the 12 gates of heaven and earth. It was the primeval demon's demonization of the Shaolin Temple's 12 gates of Golden Bell Shield. It was obtained by a Western barbarian. Over the years, he has gradually mastered peerless martial arts. He wants to conquer that small country in Africa. Fu Manzhou has a friendship with him. Zheng Shangqi must be plotting something. Lianhua was puzzled. Africa is so desolate. Which small country can cause so much trouble? Shi Xiang smiled. Junior sister, don't look down on this country. According to the Wudong book collection, this country is the only place in the world that produces Tai-Adamantin. Tai-Adamantin is one of the 6 most precious metals used to reforge divine armaments. It is extremely precious. Lianhua thought for a moment and cupped her fists. I understand Shi Xiang's intention. Don't worry, Shi Xiang. I won't let Fu Manzhou succeed. Shi Xiang was relieved. He handed her a plane ticket to Kenya and said, that small country is called Wakanda. They are afraid of the outside world spying on the Tai-Adamantin mine, so they have always been closed off. So, there are no direct flights there. I bought you a ticket to their neighboring country, Kenya. I also told Kunlun to take care of you there. Kunlun will arrange a guide for you, wherever you go. The new director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Coulson, looked at the few old men in front of him with a bitter face. It was Captain America who stood up to ease his embarrassment. Steve said solemnly, Crow disappeared after the war at sea. He suddenly appeared 3 years ago and killed the old king of Wakanda and stole some of the vibranium. He was modified by Adam and is one of Adam's chess pieces. Now that Crow has reappeared and contacted many supervillains to invade Wakanda, the Avengers can't just sit back and do nothing. War Machine Brigadier General James objected. Now that the Avengers are at their weakest, Natasha has betrayed us. Tani has been contaminated by that damn Sargeras, and his mental state is very unstable. Ultron is eyeing us covetously. Thor has returned to Asgard and has lost contact. Hulk has left Earth with the professor to study on another planet. It is said that he is comprehending Buddhism. Spider-Man is still a child. Now we only have you and the Winter Soldier, Hawkeye, Falcon, Ant-Man, and a few others. Most of us are still novices. We are weaker than ever. At this moment, Coulson's communicator suddenly lit up. He quickly picked it up and breathed a sigh of relief when he saw the other party's name. Coulson raised his hand to stop the Avengers from arguing. He turned on the communicator, and a dark-skinned, bald, one-eyed man suddenly appeared on the screen. Steve was dissatisfied. Nick, if you're no longer the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., you shouldn't control this organization remotely. Everyone knew the intentions of the one-eyed man. Although he had stepped down from the director's throne, it was only to get out of the whirlpool that was S.H.I.E.L.D. and to carry out some secret conspiracies or plans. But before he left, he chose Coulson, who was the most popular but had no opinions, to be the director. He wanted to control S.H.I.E.L.D. and become the director. This also caused Steve to be dissatisfied. Captain S.H.I.E.L.D. is too conspicuous. It has become a target for aliens and criminals who are plotting against Earth. Someone must act in a more secretive place. The one-eyed man said, since the disaster of Adam, the Avengers have been greatly weakened. I have been looking for new members for the past few years. Now that the crisis has come again, it is time to replenish the strength of the Avengers. What the one-eyed man did not say was that since Anthony Stark was mentally contaminated by Sargeras, suffering from his own unstable and self-destructive mental state, and began to drink heavily. The Avengers lacked a leader to compete with Captain America. Now that Captain America was almost the only leader, it was time to add sand to the Avengers. He had already chosen a new leader to replace Stark, a stubborn, self-opinionated, and powerful hero. The reason why the One-Eyed Dragon did not introduce her to the Avenger was that he was worried about her character. She was not a person who would willingly submit to others. She was a control freak, a paranoid maniac, and a petty woman who had gone through menopause for decades and was not likable. The vibranium produced by Wakanda is one of the most precious resources on Earth. The One-Eyed Man said, 3 years ago, just a ship with less than 250 kilograms of vibranium caused the most destructive battle. Now that area of the sea is still a no-fly zone. Once someone appears nearby, they will hear some mysterious whispers and gradually go crazy. We must protect Wakanda's vibranium from being used by those criminals. So I agree with the captain's view. The captain will lead people to help Wakanda destroy Ulysses Crow. The One-Eyed Man secretly said in his heart, then it will be convenient for me to add sand. The Avengers cannot be a one-man team of heroes. The new heroes need the captain to leave temporarily to prevent them from being captured by the captain's personal charm. Chapter 1052. Strange and Chunong were travel-worn. From northern Sudan to Wakanda, they had been walking for a week. Along the way, there were tribal militias in turmoil and the unstable situation in Africa. It was a ghastly sight to see. In most of the countries on the African continent, the government was like an empty shell. This place had become the source of the war between warlords. Along the way, Strange watched as Chun-Ong used his equipment to film and inquire about the political situation and people's livelihood in Africa. He wrote down many documents, but he was still puzzled. In the end, on the second day, they arrived at the Kenyan border. SHIELD found them. Agent May knocked on the door of the hotel they were staying in. After Strange opened the door for her, she threw a stack of documents in a transparent document bag on him. Then, she threw one to Chun-Ong, who was writing a document next to him. These are the relevant documents of the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Relief Coordinator. Now, you are the joint investigators sent by China and the United States to investigate the humanitarian disaster in Africa. May glanced at Chun-Ong and said angrily, SHIELD doesn't owe you anything now. Don't keep mentioning the 280 million. Chun-Ong patted the documents beside him and said, print these documents again. I want to officially make a copy of them to the United Nations. Strange picked up the documents in his hand and flipped them over and over again. There was nothing wrong with them. These were completely based on his and Chun-Ang's real identities. The documents showed that he was a well-known neurosurgeon in New York. He joined Doctors Without Borders 6 years ago to provide medical assistance to Africa. Later, he was hired as the United Nations Disaster Relief Coordinator to investigate the humanitarian disaster in Africa. Chun-Ong is a senior insurance investigator for the Chinese government. A year ago, he was sent to Africa to investigate the African Aid Project. 3 months ago, he was hired as the United Nations Disaster Relief Coordinator to lead the joint investigation of the humanitarian disaster in Africa. Chun-Ong said, with this identity, we can officially go to Wakanda. Although Wakanda is closed, it is still a member of the United Nations. These days, from the northeast of Africa to Wakanda, I have completed the relevant investigation documents of the countries along the way. Soon, I will file them with the United Nations. We will enter Wakanda in the name of the humanitarian disaster investigation and officially contact the Wakanda officials. So you asked SHIELD to forge these identities? Strange asked with a strange expression. Chun-Ong looked at him in surprise. I have an official background in China. You are an American citizen and have the help of SHIELD. Behind us are China and the United States, or rather, the People's Revolutionary Alliance and the United States and their allies are endorsing us. Of course it was true. Official endorsement. You can keep this identity in the future. You can use it at any time. Chenong stuffed the relevant documents into his briefcase, then hung a new suit tailored to his body type in the closet. These clothes were also provided by Agent May. Agent May also said, "Please wait for a while. A new colleague will be arriving soon. Tell him to meet us at Wakanda." Chenong used United Nations paper to reprint and bind the relevant documents as he asked, "How should we address our new colleague?" "His name is Steve. He is the disaster relief coordinator sent by the American government. You are the disaster relief coordinator sent by China." Strange is Doctors Without Borders, representing non-governmental organizations. Agent May said quickly, "It seems that you also want to take action against Wakanda." Chenong did not comment. May said, "We are really worried that the gold resources in Wakanda will be used by illegal organizations and people. So, you are the observers of the international humanitarian disaster of the United Nations in name. But in fact, you have another secret identity. This is your secret identity document. In your secret identity, you are the United Nations investigators and observers of the gold resources in Wakanda. If necessary, you can use this identity to interfere with the political situation in Wakanda." Strange said unhappily, "Since when can SHLD act in the name of the United Nations?" May smiled reservedly and said, "It's not just us. Investigator Chun Ong has the official background of the People's Revolutionary Alliance, the United States, and the People's Revolutionary Alliance. So, we are the United Nations." After sending Agent May away, Chun Ong and Strange changed into suits, took the relevant documents, and took a special car arranged by the Kenyan government to Wakanda. Kenya was also a chaotic warlord, but the cooperation of the United States and the People's Revolutionary Alliance gave Chun Ong and Strange strong official resources in Kenya. The more powerful the warlord, the more respect they had to give them. So, under the escort of the government army, which was actually the most powerful warlord that occupied the capital, Nairobi, they smoothly drove through the territories occupied by other warlords and headed to Wakanda. At this time, the new king, T'Challa, had already received news from the commissioners sent by the United Nations to observe the humanitarian disaster in Africa. Although Wakanda was very close to the outside world, it was only to hide its own strength and technology. In fact, it was relatively active politically, especially in the past few years. Under the leadership of the old king, T'Challa, Wakanda was quite active in the relevant affairs of the United Nations. It was only in the past 3 years, under the impact of global isolation, the influence and authority of the United Nations on various countries and regions in the world was weakened, and the old king was killed, that Wakanda gradually reduced its political investment. But now, it still had to give face to the United Nations, as well as the people behind it, the People's Revolutionary Alliance and the United States. As soon as Chenong and the others got out of the car, they saw the current king of Wakanda, T'Challa. They got out of the car at the Border Tribe. The Border Tribe guarded the border of Wakanda and had always covered up the real situation in Wakanda. So when Chenong got out of the car, he saw a large nomadic tribe. The tribe wore traditional African textiles, herded a large number of sheep, and nomadic pasture. They rode on galloping horses and roared past in groups. What was shown was the ecology of an ordinary nomadic tribe. T'Challa welcomed Chenong and the others with a smile on his face. "Welcome to Wakanda, United Nations observers. Our political situation is relatively stable, and the people of Wakanda are not as warlike as other tribes. They're used to living according to tradition, so there are no internal conflicts. However, our industry is not developed. Most of the people of Wakanda still rely on herding sheep to make a living. They maintain the traditional lifestyle of the tribe and are very poor and backward. We have no industry and we lack resources. Although Wakanda's political situation is stable, it is lacking in development. After I took over, I have always wanted to revitalize the economy of Wakanda." T'Challa lied without changing his expression as he observed the facial expressions of the two observers. Chapter 1053. Chunong and Strange temporarily stayed in Wakanda in the name of the United Nations Commissioner, But the only place they could go was to the nomadic tribes on the border of Wakanda, because the capital of Wakanda did not exist in name. On the surface, it was just a desolate and uninhabited mountain range. In Wakanda's territory, there were high mountains, valleys, and rivers. The natural scenery was refreshing. In the past few days, apart from pretending to investigate the border tribes in Wakanda's disguised town, the two did not do anything too out of line. 3 days later, their colleague, Steve, also came to meet them. Captain America was wearing a tight suit and gold-framed glasses. He was dressed like a gentleman, but the muscles on his body stretched the suit tight. He adjusted his ties somewhat uncomfortably. Seeing his uncomfortable look, Chun-Ong pretended to welcome him, smiled, and hugged him. "Steve, you're finally here." Steve could only pretend to be familiar with him. On the surface, it looked like the two were hugging each other warmly. In fact, Chun-Ong moved closer to Steve's ear and said, "Relax. Your disguise is very poor now. Have you not worn formal clothes for a long time?" "No." Steve smiled bitterly. "The suit they prepared for me is too small." Chun-Ong glanced at Steve's strong muscles, shook his head, and said, "They should have given you a larger size. Let's go in first and compare the information. Have you memorized your background documents? Later, Tekala will probably come to entertain you." Chun-Ong looked at the somewhat uneasy Steve in surprise. "Does he know you?" "We've met a few times, but I was wearing a mask at that time. If you're exposed, please draw a line with us. Just say that SHIELD sent you to infiltrate in disguise." Chun-Ong said helplessly, "They should have sent someone more reliable." Chun-Ong brought Steve to the accommodation that Wakanda had arranged for them. It was a small 2-story building. Like most of the buildings in Africa, it was not renovated and could only be considered clean. After all, Wakanda was one of the poorest countries in Africa, and Strange was giving free medical treatment to the people of Wakanda. It was obvious that both parties were uncomfortable. Wakanda had a well-developed medical and relief system, and they had to find people to disguise themselves as the most common malnourished and malaria-stricken people in Africa. Malnutrition was still manageable. They found poor tribesmen from neighboring Kenya. Anyway, these tribesmen could only speak the local dialect. On the one hand, they could not communicate, and on the other hand, they had no concept of a country at all. They didn't even know which country they were from. Who could object to the fact that they were the people of Wakanda? But Wakanda had to provide a few patients and poor people who could communicate with them. In order to disguise themselves, they were forced to be infected with tropical diseases. It was really hard. The awkward thing was that Strange was well aware of this. He was not an ordinary doctor after all. So when he encountered some patients who did not put enough effort into their disguise, his bad temper was a little hard to control. Strange had a strange look on his face as he examined a patient who also had poor acting skills. After a series of examinations, he wrote a diagnosis and said, "You're not suffering from malaria. Although there are symptoms of swaying, it's just an allergic reaction." This allergic reaction is very similar to the symptoms of malaria, Strange said with a strange look on his face. "We used a virus-free plasmodium for specific immunotherapy. Although there will be early symptoms of malaria, it will not continue to develop. Instead, it will provide the host with acquired immunity. Immunity to malaria is very complicated. Nonspecific immunity and specific immunity are mutually complementary. Generally speaking, immunity to malaria basically has no protection against the attack of the heterogeneous plasmodium. In addition, there is the specificity of strains and stages. The human body's resistance to the plasmodium during one stage of development does not necessarily have resistance to other stages of development. This is a world-class problem, but you seem to have solved it. This virus-free plasmodium is equivalent to a perfect compound vaccine. This can't be a creation of nature, a medical miracle, but the result of quite advanced technology and medical systems. It was obvious that the patient opposite him was also very flustered. What should he do? His disguise seemed to have been seen through. He stammered, "I once participated in a medical aid program in the United States, and after I came back, I became like this. Can you tell me which medical aid organization?" Strange took out a pen and was about to write it down. "I'm going to nominate them for the next Nobel Prize. My English is not good. What are you saying that I don't understand?" The patient said in a panic. He hurriedly took off the examination equipment on his body and said, "I haven't fed my sheep yet. I have to go." Then he fled in a panic. When the other patients saw this situation, they also scattered in confusion, leaving behind a few real patients from primitive tribes. Strange saw Steve and Chenong at the door. He got up, took off his stethoscope, and said, "These people's disguises are simply mocking me. A few of them who are not sick, but they used newly infected and undeveloped pathogens for me to examine. There are also those who pretend to be seriously ill with allergic reactions. None of the patients who are malnourished or develop can speak English. They look like primitive people who have never cleaned up in their lives. Generally speaking, no matter how good the medical skills and experience of the medical aid doctors are, in the absence of medical equipment, they can only rely on physical examinations and temporary routine examinations. They can only look, listen, question, and feel the pulse. It's impossible to see through their disguise." Chenong said, "I'm waiting to see how you explain to Wakanda how you found out about this." Strange turned around and poured himself a glass of water. "That's a headache for them." As he said this, Strange suddenly froze. Steve went up to see what was wrong with him. He saw Strange holding a glass of water and staring at the ripples echoing on the surface of the water. Suddenly, Steve's sensitive perception also made him feel that something was wrong with the surrounding environment, and he was alarmed. "There's a high-frequency vibration." Strange stared at the water and said, "There's a vibration source that's constantly emitting high-frequency vibrations approaching. He's probing." The few of them suddenly felt their pores shrink, and their hearts gave a strong warning. Strange shouted, "Get down!" The next moment, a powerful energy shock came from the sky, sweeping the earth. The border tribe where Chun Ong and the others were was hit head-on by the ultra-high frequency vibration. Countless tents were overturned, and the concrete began to shatter. Captain America was the first to get up and jump out of the window, and the others followed closely behind. Chun Ong had just thrown the last patient from the primitive tribe out of the window when he jumped out of the window himself. The whole building collapsed. He rolled on the ground and stood up steadily. In front of him was a wasteland, a desolate sight. The peaceful settlement had turned into ruins in the blink of an eye. The surrounding Wakanda people were crying, and all kinds of tribal languages and cries filled the air. A few of the Wakanda warriors were draped in traditional kanga. They spread the kanga and stood in front of them. Blue energy flowed around the kanga. From its appearance, the kanga looked like a large rectangular piece of floral cloth. The edges of the floral cloth were wide, and there were colorful patterns in the middle. They were all Wakanda's mysterious characters. As the energy flowed, the patterns lit up and formed an energy shield in front of the warriors. In the sky, with the sound of the alarm, a protective shield visible to the naked eye was activated. A huge light blue canopy fell from the sky, protecting the entire border tribe. Outside the canopy, a tall man in silver was floating in the air. His body emitted energy waves continuously, supporting him to float in the sky. He looked down at the border tribe and lightly placed his hand on the energy canopy. The canopy shook violently, reverberating with dense ripples. The border tribe warriors on the ground roared and let out strange battle cries. The man in the sky tilted his head, looking down on them. Strange, Chunong, and the others observed the sudden change calmly. Steve, on the other hand, went up to help save the people. He dug out the injured Wakanda people from the ruins. Fortunately, the people of the border tribe did not like concrete houses because of their nomadic culture. They usually lived in tents. Although the tents looked simple, they were high-tech products. The surface of the tents was made of traditional African fabric, and it could raise an energy barrier. Therefore, after the impact, the casualties were not serious. But there were still many people who were injured. Steve carried a little girl with a broken leg and rushed over. He said to Strange, "Help take care of her." He then turned around to save the others. Strange helplessly fixed the injured person's wound. He knew with a touch. Her leg bone is broken. We need to fix it. Find me a stick, Strange said to Chenong. But Chenong only dug out a small box from the nearby ruins. He found a piece of fabric that looked like gauze, walked up to the patient, and said to Strange, "Get out of the way." Strange obediently gave way. Chenong wrapped the fabric around the twisted calf a few times, then touched the pattern on it. Blue energy flowed through the fabric, and the fabric swelled up, protecting the injured area like an airbag. At the same time, it released anesthetic freezing gas, which began to slightly correct the bone. The nanomachines began to repair the wound and remove the bone fragments. Only then did Strange see the surrounding Wakanda people take out these things and stick them on their bodies. The bleeding was stopped, and the internal injuries were treated. At this time, Steve had already rushed back with another injured woman in his arms. Chapter 1054. The moment a hole appeared in the protective shield, an invisible vibration wave passed through the hole and swept towards the camp of the border tribe. Wherever the energy wave swept through, the trees, tents, and even the fences of the sheep sheds were all shattered in the vibration. The debris shot out in the direction of the sound wave. The most terrifying thing was the equipment made of vibranium. Under the vibration of the high-energy sound wave, vibranium vibrated at an extremely high frequency of hundreds of millions of times per second. The internal energy of these vibrations was converted into kinetic energy. Just a tiny bit of it was enough to accelerate those vibranium items to a high speed of more than Mach 5. Captain America saw with his own eyes that a vibranium spear stuck diagonally into the ground was vibrating at an extremely high frequency under the impact of the sound wave. This strange metal with extraordinary conductive properties seemed to be accepting the powerful energy transmitted by the sound wave. As the frequency of the sound wave changed, the resonance of the vibranium spear also changed. As this change reached its limit, Steve saw the spear ring by itself, and an invisible vibration wave burst out. It bounced up from the ground, spun, and flew out following the direction of the sound wave. The sound wave that passed through the protective shield weakened very quickly, so these vibranium weapons were only wrapped in the shock wave and shot toward the Border Tribe warriors. At this time, the Border Tribe warriors had already assembled into teams. They put their hands on their shoulders, lined up in a row, and unfolded their cloaks, Kaga. The rough Wakanda characters and patterns flowed with energy, and the vibranium threads woven into them emitted a bright blue light. The shield-shaped barrier formed by energy was connected together, forming a barrier. Countless vibration waves, infrasound, sound wave, ultrasonic wave, light wave, electromagnetic wave, and shock wave interweaved together to form a shock wave that hit the barrier head-on. It only caused a slight impact to the human wall of the Wakanda warriors. The energy shield wall was not damaged at all, but the spear that followed immediately carried an unimaginably powerful force. The spear that broke through the sound barrier at a high speed of Mach 8 only left a silver light in the air. With unparalleled force, it pierced through the energy shield wall and nailed the Wakanda warriors to the ground one by one. The tail of the spear was still trembling rapidly, turning into a circle of afterimages. The chief of the border tribe in the middle of the shield wall roared when he saw that many of his warriors had fallen beside him. He was extremely angry. After the spear broke through the energy shield wall and killed more than 10 warriors, even if the other warriors reacted quickly, they still couldn't fill the gap in time. The shockwave broke through the shield wall and leaked some of its power through the gap. Behind them were the old and the weak of the tribe. Just a bit of the power that leaked out had affected dozens of old and weak women and children. Those who were slightly better off were hit head-on by the powerful shockwave and suffered minor injuries. Those who were even more unlucky were grazed by the low-frequency sound waves mixed in the shockwave and died on the spot with their internal organs ruptured. Steve, who was helping to rescue the injured at the front line, was also swept away by the aftershock. The impact threw him violently into the ruins and buried him in debris. Strange had to stop the rescue when he saw this. He shook his head and said, "They're innocent. I can't turn a blind eye to this." After Chinong dealt with the patients, he said, "Many people are injured here. That's why I have to stop people from getting hurt." Strange took off his suit, and a cloak rushed out of his suitcase. With a hint of excitement, it wrapped around his body and continued to push Strange towards the battlefield. "Magic floating cloak," Chinong said. "Looks like you've made up your mind. Strange, you're no longer a doctor in your heart. You've chosen to be a warrior." Strange turned around and went to the front line of the battle. Shadows of runes appeared on his hands, and a complicated magic circle formed on his palm. He drew a semicircle with his right hand to the side of his body. In the blink of an eye, the sky and the earth turned upside down. A transparent glass-like space isolated the battlefield. The warriors of Wakanda were surprised to see that a spatial barrier had appeared behind them, isolating the old and weak of the border tribe from the battlefield. The United Nations commissioner, who had changed into a strange cloak, walked towards them. Some of the warriors subconsciously turned around and raised their spears at him, but that man spread out his hands and said, "We are friends, not enemies." The young chief of the tribe at the border looked at him deeply, then turned around and shouted, "Not enemies. Continue to fight." When Strange passed by the ruins, Steve also struggled out of it and said to him, "Count me in." Strange hesitated for a moment before pulling him into the mirror dimension as well. On the other side, Chunong also placed the medical supplies that he had found in the ruins next to a slightly clean bed. Several Wakanda women were beside him as assistants and began to rescue the wounded. He stopped the bleeding and stitched up the wounded while manipulating the voodoo doll. The resurrected corpses that had been appearing beside them as local guides began to move involuntarily. The wizard said helplessly, "I'm willing to fight. Can you not control my body?" Chinong sneered and said, "You don't know how to fight at all." The warriors of Wakanda formed a battle formation and faced the man with a silver metallic luster. Strange had already risen into the air and floated directly in front of the enemy outside the protective shield. He also used a suspension ring to open a spatial door and took out Steve's round shield. Steve smiled and said, "I was worried that I didn't have a suitable guy. If you were here, the battle in New York wouldn't have been so difficult. I didn't have time to rush over at that time, Captain." Strange spread his hands and smiled. "The protective shield won't last long. Will your mirror dimension be able to hold on?" A dark silhouette stood beside them. He casually picked up a long spear that had pierced through the corpses of the border tribe warriors. He twirled it in his hand, making a few sparks with the spear. Strange was surprised and said, "You're not a wizard. You're—" He looked back and found that Chunong was outside the mirror dimension, rescuing the injured women and children next to the ruins. Sensing his gaze, Chunong looked up and smiled slightly. The meaning behind it was self-evident. Performing surgery and controlling the resurrected corpses at the same time. Strange said solemnly, "Multitasking, it's more likely that you can't do either. For me." The resurrected corpse grinned, revealing his white teeth. "It's a piece of cake. How long can the protective shield last?" Wakabi, the tribe leader of the border tribe, shouted through the communication device. He asked the person who was most likely Princess Su Rue's technological supporter. The female voice answered, "A few more hours. Open the protective shield." Wakabi ordered, "What did you say?" "Open the protective shield now. Your tribe is behind us." The other side was shocked. "Someone helped us create an independent battlefield. Now, I need you to open the protective shield and let our warriors take care of that son of 8B*TCH. Wakabi said angrily, "You're now in another quadrant. This is a different dimension technology. It replaces the real world and pulls you into the mirror dimension." The person on the other side was shocked, but quickly regained his senses. "I will cancel the current protective shield and then reactivate it according to your coordinates. At that time, the new protective shield will isolate the relative coordinates of the mirror dimension and the real world. Even if you leave the mirror dimension, you will still be outside the protective shield. At that time, if you haven't eliminated the enemy, you'll appear outside with the enemy." Wakanda's defensive system was quickly set up. "If we can't eliminate the enemy, we can only die a glorious death," Wakabi said solemnly. This is the mission of a warrior. In the mirror dimension, the blue energy canopy began to crumble bit by bit. The silver-haired man, who was isolated outside the canopy, also stopped attacking the protective shield when he saw that. His gaze was thought-provoking as he looked at the canopy with interest at the Wakanda warriors who were ready for battle and brimming with killing intent. Captain America held the round shield in his hand tightly. The resurrected corpse swung the vibranium spear a few times. The vibranium spear in his hand whistled through the air. He was familiarizing himself with the weapon in his hand. As for Strange, he was using the eye of Agamotto to find out what was behind this attack.